Hey there, in this video we will watch moments where animal attacks were captured on camera, from a travel vlogger who stood too close to the Zambese's edge to a roadside stop where a lone buffalo closed the distance in seconds. It was May 14, 2016, in the South Luangwa Valley, Zambia. The walking safari had progressed into tall grass along a game path where visibility narrowed, and the group continued forward without repositioning upwind. The air carried damp grass and animal scent, typical at dawn, but stronger at ground level, and the stretch ahead showed little small animal movement, a condition guides associate with predator presence. Arik Madsen was 41, a logistics supervisor from Odense whose work involved route planning, inventory timing, and risk mitigation. Colleagues described him as quiet and methodical. Recently divorced and living alone, this safari was his first trip outside Europe. He booked through a licensed operator and chose a walking safari after reviewing incident summaries indicating lower risk compared to vehicle-related encounters. He selected a premium walking safari for its controlled spacing, firearm support, and limited group size. He attended the safety briefing, asked about wind direction and visibility, and did not consume alcohol prior to departure. The valley that morning was pale with dry grass and low river haze. South Luangwa supports a dense lion population, including established male coalitions that patrol territory at dawn. Adult male lions can accelerate to over 30 miles per hour in short bursts and cover distances under 60 feet in less than 2 seconds. Attacks at close range typically involve direct contact without vocalization or display. The guide carried a large caliber rifle and wore a chest-mounted body camera for safety review. Warning signs were present. A downslope breeze pushing scent forward, brief impala alarm snorts that stopped abruptly, and fresh, overlapping lion tracks crossing the path. The guide paused, checked the wind once, then continued instead of retreating. Without visible warning, the grass ahead parted. 3 adult male lions burst from under 50 feet at full sprint, blurring the first frames of the body camera. There was no charge display or vocalization. The first lion struck Arik head-on, colliding with his upper torso and face and driving him backward. Its jaws closed laterally across the face, fracturing the maxilla and mandible through momentum rather than a downward clamp, followed by a single shake that tore soft tissue as the camera jolted. A second lion struck from behind almost immediately, its jaws locking across the pelvis and upper thigh and transecting major vessels on contact. Blood pulsed across the grass as the animal pulled back. A third lion moved laterally near the lens, snapping and blocking the guide's approach. The guide fired once. Recoil and muzzle dip show the round striking dirt short of the animals. Arik made a single involuntary sound and then went silent. The 2 lions leaned away from each other, using opposing body weight rather than shaking. The pelvis rotated outward as tissue failed, exposing bone near the hip. Blood spread across the frame while the first lion maintained its grip on the head, compressing the airway. Loss of consciousness followed rapidly, consistent with visible blood loss and airway compromise on the footage. A second rifle report, and the sound of paws dragging the body several feet into cover. The image blurred as the guide stepped backward. 1 lion advanced briefly toward the camera before turning away. From first contact to complete loss of movement, approximately 45 seconds elapsed. The guide withdrew and radioed base immediately, leading the remaining guests back along the path without running. An anti-poaching unit arrived 22 minutes later. By then, there were no signs of life. The lions had disengaged after initial feeding, leaving extensive trauma and partial dismemberment consistent with a rapid predatory sequence rather than a defensive mauling. The coroner later determined the cause of death as exsanguination combined with severe craniofacial trauma, including multiple jaw fractures and complete transection of the femoral artery. Death occurred quickly from blood loss and airway compromise, with no evidence of prolonged survival. The footage was reviewed internally for safety assessment, and a short segment later circulated without identifiers. The safari operator revised wind assessment protocols and increased buffer distances near tall grass corridors. No legal action followed, and only a brief local report noted the fatality without naming the victim. It was June 12, 2014, in a quiet rental neighborhood outside Spokane, Washington, where the afternoon heat settled unevenly across the yards, and the tense pacing of a family's wolf dog hinted at a day that would not end the way it began. Mira Dalco, 3 years old, was the youngest in a family that had moved into the rental only months before. Her parents, trying to steady themselves financially, spent most afternoons balancing work calls, bills, and childcare in the same crowded kitchen. Mira was known to wander toward the back door to look at the yard, where she liked the noise of birds more than the toys inside. The sticking latch on the sliding screen had been a problem since spring, but with rent overdue and repairs stacked up, her parents kept telling themselves they'd fix it soon. Rowan, the family's 90-pound wolf dog hybrid, had been adopted the previous year from an unlicensed breeder outside the city. The parents believed that giving him a backyard and routine would calm him. His reputation in the neighborhood was the opposite. Neighbors had filed 3 complaints about him lunging at the fence and escaping through gaps near the gate. The parents downplayed it, assuming the behavior came from unused energy. In truth, Rowan's instincts, part domestic dog, part high-content wolf ancestry, made him unpredictable, especially in tight spaces. Mira had never been allowed to play with him unsupervised, but the parents believed the yard barrier was enough. In the CCTV footage, Rowan moved with the distinct pacing common in wolf dogs under stress, tail carried stiff, head forward, fixated alternately on a stray cat outside the fence and the motion of the family through the glass door. Wolf dogs retain strong prey drive behaviors from their wolf ancestry, rapid triggered responses to movement, powerful jaw leverage, and a tendency to seize the head and upper neck in conflict behaviors. Adults can average bite forces around 400 pounds per square inch, more than enough to crush or tear fragile tissue. That day, the parents focused on paperwork in the kitchen, assuming Mira was still drawing near the table. When she wandered toward the back door and reached for the loose screen, neither parent saw her until it was too late. At 4:16 p.m., the garage camera captured Mira pushing the warped sliding screen open with one palm and stepping onto the deck. The screen bounced slightly on its track, leaving a gap behind her. Rowan, already keyed up, snapped his attention toward the movement inside the house the moment the door shifted. Mira took 2 steps onto the boards, her weight tiny against the wide planks. In the footage, Rowan doesn't hesitate. He launches from the far end of the yard in a straight line, accelerating in a full sprint across roughly 25 feet. His body is low, ears angled forward, the charge unmistakably predatory rather than playful. He reaches her in less than a second. The footage shows the precise moment he clamps onto the left side of her head, jaws enveloping scalp and hair, lifting her in a brief, uneven upward pull. Her body goes rigid, then drops instantly when he releases to reposition. The fall is short, only about 2 feet, but she hits the deck with no attempt to catch herself. Rowan grabs her again before she can move, dragging her across the boards toward the stairs. Her small body scrapes against a support post, leaving visible streaks from her skin and clothing as he pulls her onto the grass. The mother enters the frame running at full speed, screaming, her hands outstretched, but Rowan circles once with the short 2-step arc commonly seen in wolf-influenced holding patterns, the movement rigid and focused. He regrips the child by the face and upper neck. The footage shows a violent shake, his entire torso twisting, before he drops her and bites again at the temples. Each rebite lands higher on the head, consistent with instinctive predation behavior, where wolves aim to disable prey rapidly by targeting the face, side of the head, and upper neck. The father appears seconds later with a landscaping rake, swinging hard. The first hit glances off Rowan's flank. The second lands closer to the ribs, causing a short break in the attack. Rowan retreats only a few feet, still focused on Mira, who is motionless on the grass. When the father swings again, Rowan darts forward for one last bite, clamping onto the upper side of her head with a quick, incomplete grip typical of retreat phase bites, before backing off under continued strikes. The final retreat is slow, ears pinned back, does not attempt another charge. The mother called 911 at 4:17 p.m., her voice recorded as strained and clipped. Paramedics arrived 6 minutes later. Footage from responding units and later reports confirmed that Mira showed no signs of responsiveness on scene. The coroner report noted multiple crushing wounds to the skull, severe tearing of scalp and facial tissue, and fractures at the base of the skull consistent with repeated high-force bites. There was no evidence she regained consciousness at any point, and the rapid blood loss, combined with brain trauma, meant that even immediate hospital care would not have changed the outcome. Animal control officers seized Rowan that evening. He was euthanized the next day after assessment. The breeder received only minor civil fines for improper licensing. The Dalco family left the property 3 months later, the yard emptied, the deck boards still scarred where the wood had scraped during the attack. It was June 14, 2016, when Raleigh Font arrived at the Ol Pejeta Conservancy buffer zone in Kenya for what should have been a routine maintenance job. The 37-year-old wildlife fence technician had been contracted to service motion sensors along the conservancy boundary, a critical task that helped protect both wildlife and local communities. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the acacia-dotted landscape, where the protected wilderness met human settlement. Raleigh was known among his colleagues for his efficiency and preference for working alone, often completing inspections before nightfall to avoid the increased predator activity that came with darkness. His reputation for thoroughness had earned him contracts across multiple conservancies throughout East Africa. The conservancy's perimeter stretched for miles, monitored by a network of cameras and sensors that required regular maintenance. Rangers monitoring alarm systems remotely were unable to reach the location in time during emergencies, given the vast distances involved. Earlier that week, wildlife tracking teams had reported a pride of lions following migrating plains game closer to the boundary than usual, drawn by the seasonal movement of zebra and wildebeest. The dry season had concentrated wildlife around remaining water sources, creating a volatile situation where predators and prey congregated in smaller areas. Local communities had reported increased livestock predation, indicating the lions were becoming more desperate for food sources. Raleigh's task was straightforward: replace a damaged motion sensor and recalibrate a camera tower before the day ended. The African lion stands as one of nature's most formidable apex predators, capable of reaching speeds approaching 40 miles per hour in short bursts. Adult females, the primary hunters of the pride, possess powerful jaws capable of delivering a crushing bite force that can quickly incapacitate prey. Their hunting strategy relies on stealth, patience, and explosive power, with attacks typically targeting the neck or throat to achieve suffocation through crushing the trachea or blocking airways. Lions are opportunistic hunters, and human encounters often occur when people inadvertently enter their territory or display vulnerable behavior. The Conservancy's lions had grown increasingly bold as drought conditions pushed them closer to human activity zones. These particular lions had been tracked for months, with researchers noting their unusual willingness to approach the fence line during daylight hours. Behavioral studies conducted weeks earlier had documented the pride spending extended periods observing human activity along the perimeter, a concerning development that suggested diminishing natural fear of people. Raleigh made his fatal mistake when he decided to leave the designated service road. To save time between two fence posts, he entered the tall grass that provided perfect cover for predators. The fixed perimeter camera, positioned at an oblique angle to the maintenance area, captured only fragmented glimpses of the encounter. A single lioness had approached from behind, her golden coat blending seamlessly with the dried savanna grass. Raleigh was kneeling beside the damaged sensor, focused on his repair work, when the lioness made her move. The predator had been stalking him for several minutes, using the natural terrain to remain completely undetected. The partial footage that survived showed the devastating speed of the attack. The lioness launched herself forward with explosive force, her powerful hindquarters propelling her massive frame through the air. She struck Raleigh from behind, her front paws slamming into his back and shoulders with enough force to knock him face first into the ground. The impact was devastating, sending his tools scattering across the dirt. Raleigh's body hit the earth as the full weight of the predator crashed down upon him. Almost immediately, thick clouds of dust and disturbed vegetation obscured the camera's view, leaving only distorted shapes visible through the haze of debris. What audio sensors captured in those terrible moments painted a harrowing picture. Raleigh's desperate shouts rang out as the lioness clamped her powerful jaws around his throat and neck, her canine teeth seeking the crushing grip that would cut off his air supply. The sounds of struggle continued for nearly a minute, thrashing movement audible through the undergrowth, Raleigh's attempts to breathe becoming increasingly labored as the lioness maintained relentless pressure on his trachea. The predator's instincts drove her to hold firm, adjusting her position whenever Raleigh's weakening body shifted beneath her. Gradually, the sounds of resistance faded as oxygen deprivation took its toll. By the time the dust began to settle, Raleigh had fallen silent, his body motionless beneath the lioness as she held her suffocating grip for several seconds longer, ensuring her prey was completely subdued. A second lion appeared moments later, approaching cautiously as the first lioness released her hold. Together, they began dragging Raleigh's lifeless body toward a cluster of thorny bushes, their powerful muscles working in coordination. A motion-triggered sensor farther along the fence line briefly captured fragmented images of the two lions moving through the undergrowth before they disappeared into dense cover. The entire attack, from first contact to final disappearance, lasted less than 3 minutes. The investigation that followed revealed that Raleigh had violated standard safety protocols, by leaving the service road and working alone in high-risk areas. Conservancy officials discovered that Raleigh had not signed in at the ranger station that morning, preventing personnel from tracking his location. His radio, found crushed near the attack site, had been switched to silent mode to avoid disturbing wildlife during his work. The medical examiner's report officially listed the cause of death as asphyxiation due to traumatic compression of the trachea and airway obstruction, resulting from a lion bite to the throat and neck. Raleigh's family released a statement expressing their grief while acknowledging the inherent dangers of wildlife conservation work. It was June 14, 2015, and the afternoon sun hung heavy over Chobe National Park in Botswana, turning the landscape into a shimmering expanse of golden grass and scattered acacia trees. The remote northern sector stretched for miles, a wilderness where tourist traffic was minimal, and wildlife moved with the confidence of creatures that rarely encountered humans. Temperatures hovered near 95 degrees, and the seasonal waterhole had become a critical gathering point for elephant herds. Marcus Holbrook adjusted his Canon camera lens, his fingers moving with practiced precision. At 42 years old, the Denver-based wildlife photographer had built a respectable reputation, capturing African wildlife. His wife Jennifer sat beside him in the Land Cruiser, reviewing the shots they'd captured that morning. The Holbrooks had arrived in Botswana 5 days earlier, their third trip to Africa in as many years. They were serious photographers who invested in top-tier equipment. Marcus specialized in elephant photography, fascinated by their complex social structures. Their guide was Cabo Motswana, a local who had been guiding tourists for 12 years. He'd developed a sixth sense for reading animal behavior and agreed to take the Holbrooks into the park's remote northern sector, where the elephants were less accustomed to vehicles. In the mid-afternoon, they spotted what Marcus had been hoping for: a herd of approximately 15 elephants gathered around a seasonal waterhole. The group included several young calves, but it was the matriarch that caught Marcus's attention. She was massive, easily identifiable by her broken right tusk. Marcus had his camera out before Cabo even brought the vehicle to a complete stop. He positioned his tripod outside the Land Cruiser's open side door. The park's regulations were clear. Visitors were supposed to remain inside their vehicles at all times, but enforcement in these remote areas was practically non-existent. The elephants appeared completely at ease. Then, just minutes into his recording, everything changed. One of the younger calves wandered away from its mother, moving toward the vehicle. It approached to within 20 feet of where Marcus stood. The matriarch noticed. Her ears flared outward. She raised her trunk high and released a trumpet call that echoed across the waterhole. Every other elephant in the herd froze. African elephants are the largest land animals on Earth, with adult females weighing between 6,000 and 7,000 pounds and standing up to 9 feet tall at the shoulder. But their size isn't what makes them dangerous. It's their intelligence and their fierce protective instincts. Elephant matriarchs will defend their family members with lethal force when necessary. They can run at speeds up to 25 miles per hour, despite their massive size, and a charging elephant generates enough momentum to flip vehicles, crush bones, and kill with a single strike. Cabo called out for Marcus to get inside. The matriarch was going to charge. Marcus hesitated. The matriarch was moving now, walking with heavy, deliberate steps directly toward them. He reached for his tripod, trying to collapse the extended legs, but the locking mechanisms were stiff. Jennifer had already scrambled back into the vehicle. The matriarch broke into a full charge, her ears pinned back, her trunk curled under her body, and her head lowered with her tusks pointing forward. Marcus dropped his tripod and dove toward the Land Cruiser's open door. His hands found the door frame just as Cabo threw the vehicle into reverse. Marcus was half inside, his legs still dangling outside, when the matriarch reached them. Her massive head struck the vehicle's side panel with the force of a wrecking ball. The entire Land Cruiser rocked violently. Marcus's grip on the doorframe was the only thing keeping him from being thrown out. The matriarch rammed again, this time catching the rear quarter panel. The impact left a deeply caved-in panel and shattered the rear window. Safety glass exploded inward. Cabo kept his foot pressed to the floor, but the Land Rover's reverse speed was limited, and the elephant was faster. The matriarch charged alongside the reversing vehicle. She swung her head sideways, and the impact knocked Marcus's grip loose. He fell from the vehicle, hitting the ground hard. Before he could even attempt to stand, the matriarch was on him. Her tusks came down with devastating force, goring through his chest. The massive elephant pressed her weight onto him, crushing his ribcage and vital organs. Marcus's body went still within seconds. Cabo slammed on the brakes. The matriarch stood over Marcus's body, trumpeting aggressively at the vehicle. Jennifer remained inside the Land Cruiser, while Cabo physically blocked her from attempting to exit. Any movement toward the matriarch would likely result in another attack. Cabo radioed for emergency assistance while keeping the vehicle at a safe distance. The matriarch remained standing over Marcus's body for nearly 10 minutes before finally returning to her herd. The other elephants had remained in a defensive formation throughout the entire incident, protecting the calves while their matriarch dealt with the perceived threat. Park rangers arrived within the hour. They confirmed Marcus was dead at the scene, massive chest trauma and internal injuries incompatible with life. Officials reviewed Marcus's recovered footage. The video clearly showed the Holbrooks operating their cameras outside the vehicle, a direct violation of park regulations. Jennifer was issued a citation but no fine, given the circumstances. The matriarch and her herd showed no unusual behavior afterward. Wildlife officials noted that she had simply done what any protective mother would do. The footage Marcus captured in his final moments was used in park safety training videos as a cautionary tale, but was never released to the public. Park officials determined that out of respect for Jennifer and the Holbrook family, the graphic nature of the attack should remain restricted to professional training contexts only. It was the evening of October 14, 2016, on the quiet forested outskirts of Bozeman, Montana, where pine trees pressed close against scattered cabins, and the air carried the damp chill of early autumn. The sun had slipped behind the ridgeline, casting amber streaks across the deck of a modest single-story home just off a gravel road. The property bordered a stretch of woodland known as a seasonal wildlife corridor. That week, residents exchanged messages about a grizzly bear repeatedly raiding unsecured trash bins, growing bold and familiar with the scent of human food. Inside the cabin lived Sandy Scraw, a 34-year-old freelance graphic designer who had moved to Montana only months earlier in search of quiet, cheaper rent and scenery that fit her small vlog channel. With roughly 4,000 subscribers, she filmed soft, slow-paced videos about cabin routines and remote living. She had no background in wildlife and no understanding of how quickly the forest behind her home could turn hostile. Her outdoor trash containers were plastic, lidless, and often overflowing with meat scraps. Grease from her stovetop drifted through the kitchen vent on the evening breeze toward the tree line. That night, she had set up her camera on a small tripod near the counter, filming a casual cooking segment as dusk settled in. The grizzly bear is the largest and most powerful land predator in North America, capable of weighing over 800 pounds and reaching speeds of 35 miles per hour in short bursts. Food-conditioned grizzlies, those that associate human dwellings with easy calories, are among the most dangerous animals a person can encounter. When strongly motivated by food, they may push into human structures, and typical residential barriers can fail quickly under force. The first sign came as a low scraping sound along the exterior wall. The camera continued recording as a massive shape appeared behind the sliding glass door. The grizzly lowered its head, pressing its snout to the frame, inhaling deeply. Then it rose, placing its weight against the glass. The wooden frame groaned but held for a moment. Sandy turned, frozen between the stove and counter, directly in line with the door and the scent pulling the animal forward. Without hesitation, the bear dropped its weight forward in a violent lunge. The glass shattered inward as the frame tore loose. The grizzly forced its head and shoulders through the opening, widening the gap with sheer mass. Sandy stepped back but hesitated, still positioned between the animal and the kitchen where the meat aromas were strongest. Her fatal mistake was remaining in that direct line, rather than retreating into a sealed interior room the moment the bear made contact with the door. As the grizzly pushed fully inside, the confined space and sudden proximity triggered a rapid, chaotic defensive reaction. A powerful forelimb swung in a short arc, striking her shoulder and upper chest with devastating force, claws opening deep lacerations and fracturing her collarbone. She was knocked sideways into the cabinets and collapsed onto the tile floor. In the same burst of movement, the bear's head dipped and snapped forward in a brief bite, clamping and releasing almost instantly. There was no clear sequence, only overlapping motion, driven by momentum, stress, and confusion. It continued forward, its weight crashing across her ribs as it forced through the narrow space. The camera was struck and knocked sideways, capturing only a blur of fur as the grizzly pushed deeper into the kitchen. By the time neighbors heard the commotion and contacted authorities, the bear was gone, slipping back into the tree line. Wildlife officials arrived within the hour, securing the scene and launching an investigation. Within days, teams located and euthanized the grizzly, confirming it was the same animal responsible for the trash raids that week. The community responded with shock and sorrow, neighbors leaving flowers along the gravel road, and online followers flooding her final videos with messages of grief.
It was August 14th, 2015, and the golden evening light stretched across the rugged landscape of western Colorado as Evan Marshall made his final maintenance rounds at the privately operated Big Cat Rescue Facility. The 27-year-old technician had been working at the sanctuary for nearly 2 years, maintaining the specialized enclosures that housed rescued mountain lions, lynx, and other wildcats. Evan had grown up on a cattle ranch in eastern Colorado, where handling unpredictable livestock was simply part of daily life. His natural confidence around large animals had impressed the facility director during his hiring process, and Evan had quickly established himself as the most reliable maintenance worker on staff. The big cat seemed accustomed to his presence during routine repairs and cleaning, rarely showing signs of agitation when he worked near their enclosures. The facility housed 12 rescued mountain lions, including a mature female named Sierra, who had been brought to the sanctuary 3 years earlier after being orphaned as a cub. Evan had been involved in Sierra's daily care since his first week on the job, assisting with feeding protocols, enclosure upkeep, and routine observation duties. Over time, he began to view Sierra less as a dangerous wild animal and more as a familiar presence, frequently remarking to co-workers that she appeared unusually calm around him. That growing familiarity gradually led him to become more casual about safety boundaries that were designed to exist precisely because familiarity could be misleading. Mountain lions are North America's second-largest wild cat species, with adult females typically weighing between 80 and 130 pounds. These solitary predators possess incredible strength and agility, capable of leaping up to 40 feet horizontally and 15 feet vertically. Despite their sometimes relaxed demeanor in captivity, mountain lions retain all of their natural hunting instincts, reflexes, and territorial behaviors, particularly when they perceive a threat within their enclosure. As Evan approached Sierra's enclosure that evening to inspect a damaged section of perimeter fencing, he noticed the mountain lion resting in the shade of her elevated wooden platform. Earlier, maintenance work had revealed a failure in the overlap between the primary enclosure fencing and the secondary safety barrier, creating a temporary gap that violated standard safety protocols. The defect had been logged for immediate repair the following morning, and staff had been instructed to avoid the area unless absolutely necessary. Sierra appeared completely relaxed, her breathing slow and steady as she lay in the warm afternoon air. Evan had been exchanging text messages with his girlfriend throughout the day, sending her photos of his work and describing the animals he cared for. She had asked repeatedly to see the mountain lion he spoke about most often, curious about the animal Evan seemed so confident around. Believing the situation to be safe despite the documented barrier issue, Evan pulled out his phone and opened the camera app. The mountain lion remained motionless as Evan positioned himself closer to the damaged overlap, stepping partially into the restricted buffer zone to improve his angle. He switched his phone to the front-facing camera and held it at arm's length, carefully angling the shot to capture both himself and Sierra resting behind him. Wanting a clearer frame, Evan leaned forward toward the gap in the fencing, his upper body extending closer than safety protocols allowed. The selfie, he thought, would be proof of his experience and comfort working alongside powerful predators. What Evan did not realize was that Sierra had given birth less than 48 hours earlier. The birth had occurred overnight in a concealed den box at the far end of the enclosure during a period of reduced staffing, and the cubs had not yet been observed during routine checks. Though the cubs remained hidden and silent, Sierra's maternal instincts were at their peak, dramatically heightening her sensitivity to movement, shadows, and perceived intrusions. As Evan adjusted his position for the photograph, his shadow shifted across the enclosure entrance. Sierra's head lifted instantly. In a fraction of a second, her posture changed from resting to alert, and her powerful muscles surged into motion. The attack came without warning. Sierra crossed the enclosure in 2 explosive bounds, reaching the compromised section of fencing. Just as Evan leaned closer, one massive paw shot through the gap, striking Evan's shoulder and neck with devastating force. Her claws tore through fabric and flesh, severing muscle and puncturing vital blood vessels. Evan's phone fell to the ground as Sierra's claws hooked beneath his jaw and across his throat, pulling him hard against the fencing. His struggles only intensified the animal's instinctive response. Her second paw raked across his face and scalp through the gap, opening deep lacerations as blood poured onto the dirt below. Evan's hand struck his radio during the struggle, triggering the emergency channel, but the sounds that followed were incoherent and weak. Severe blood loss, airway trauma, and shock rapidly overwhelmed his body as Sierra maintained her grip, reacting as a mother, eliminating a perceived threat near her unseen cubs. After several seconds, Evan's movement slowed and then stopped entirely, his body collapsing against the chain link barrier. The facility director discovered Evan's body approximately 20 minutes later during a routine evening walkthrough and immediately contacted emergency services and wildlife authorities. The subsequent investigation determined that Evan had entered a restricted buffer zone and leaned into an unsecured barrier opening, directly violating established safety protocols. Given the recent, undocumented birth and the clearly provoked nature of the attack, authorities concluded Sierra had acted within normal maternal defensive behavior. She was transferred to a higher security, non-public facility in Wyoming, where she later successfully raised her cubs under enhanced containment measures. The incident prompted immediate statewide reviews of maintenance procedures, enclosure design, and staff training protocols at exotic animal facilities across Colorado. Yet big cats weren't the only predators that could turn deadly when humans ventured too close to their territory. In the murky waters of Louisiana, an experienced fisherman's decision to enter restricted waters would put him face to face with one of America's most powerful reptilian predators.
It was September 2, 2015, on the scrubby outskirts of the Masai Mara in Kenya, behind a budget lodge where kitchen lights cast a harsh rectangle onto bare dirt. Beyond the lit service corridor sat the trash pit, a shallow depression approximately 15 feet across, ringed with bones, plastic, and food waste, fully exposed once cooking ended and staff moved indoors, an area frequently visited by wildlife after dark. Jonelle Cruz was 29, a Filipino electrician working aboard a cruise ship, accustomed to months below decks surrounded by engine noise, heat, and diesel fumes. His work involved tracing electrical faults and restoring systems under pressure. Co-workers described him as steady and methodical. This was his first extended vacation in years, assembled from leave days and low-cost bookings. He carried a mid-range phone and a power bank, using the camera in continuous record mode rather than live broadcast to document the trip. Marek Lis, 31, worked in a warehouse in southern Poland, loading pallets, driving forklifts, and taking overtime whenever available. He traveled to Kenya after a late cancellation dropped airfare sharply. At home, he avoided risks, but consumed alcohol steadily that evening. Around other travelers, he drank quickly, laughed loudly, and stood closer than necessary. The lodge lay outside park boundaries, inexpensive and loosely regulated, with limited enforcement once night fell. The night was warm and windless. Insects filled the air, and the smell of grease, spoiled fruit, and discarded meat drifted steadily from the trash area. Soft whooping and chuffing sounds carried intermittently from the darkness, originating within 50 to 75 feet of the service corridor, close enough to be unmistakable. The sounds indicated hyenas were already nearby and stationary. Spotted hyenas are active hunters as well as scavengers, highly social and capable of coordinated attacks. Adults commonly weigh between 90 and 150 pounds, with dense forequarters, powerful neck muscles, and jaws adapted to crush bone. Near lodges, they become habituated to human light and waste patterns. Intentional feeding at close range is a documented trigger for investigative advances that can escalate rapidly to attack behavior. Warnings were visible. A laminated sign by the kitchen door banned wildlife feeding and restricted the trash area after dark. Earlier, a cook told Jonelle and Marek that hyenas entered nightly and scraps were to be dumped and left alone. A night guard waved them away once, then disengaged when they returned carrying drinks. A fixed security camera above the service corridor covered the trash pit and surrounding ground. Jonelle activated his phone camera behind the kitchen, holding it chest high in a continuous recording. He tossed meat scraps toward the edge. At least 4 hyenas were visible moving in and out of the light cone. One advanced more directly, head low, ears forward, stopping and starting. Marek stepped into frame, extending a scrap at arm's length. The hyena did not take it, and instead circled closer as additional eye reflections appeared beyond the pit. The first clear change captured on both cameras was the sudden absence of sound. Vocalizations stopped almost simultaneously. Movement accelerated at once. Marek stepped backward without looking. He fell onto his left side, striking hip and elbow hard enough to knock his upper body partially out of frame. He did not regain footing before the animals reached him. The security camera captured the full approach from above. The nearest hyena bypassed Marek's hands and arms and drove its jaws into the lower body, closing over the groin through clothing and soft tissue in a single bite. Marek's legs kicked reflexively, heels scraping concrete, as a second hyena clamped onto the lower abdomen and pulled backward. The footage shows sustained traction rather than shaking, consistent with pack-feeding behavior. Jonel's recording jolted as he stepped forward, then froze. Within seconds, the abdominal wall failed under opposing force. The injury widened as the animals pulled in different directions, bracing with shoulders and necks. Blood spread rapidly across dirt and concrete. Marek's screams dropped to strained, intermittent sounds as blood loss increased and breathing became shallow. He attempted to push up on one arm, but repeated bites to the pelvis and abdomen prevented leverage. Jonel moved closer. One hyena pivoted and bit into his forearm, canines penetrating deeply and maintaining grip. When he pulled back, the skin tore further under tension. Another animal clamped onto his right calf and shook laterally, causing immediate instability. Jonel collapsed to one knee and crawled backward, leaving a continuous smear of blood. The footage shows the hyenas briefly disengage, then reattach to Marek as his movement diminished. A kitchen worker triggered the lodge alarm after hearing sustained screaming, and the night guard radioed the nearest ranger post to report an active hyena attack. An armed ranger vehicle arrived approximately 11 minutes later, headlights sweeping the area. A warning shot was fired into open ground. The hyenas withdrew, some carrying tissue away from the illuminated zone. Marek was unresponsive when rangers reached him, with catastrophic abdominal and pelvic trauma immediately visible. Jonel remained conscious but unable to stand, bleeding heavily from deep bite wounds. The coroner later listed Marek's cause of death as rapid exsanguination from massive soft tissue destruction, including torn groin structures and ruptured pelvic vessels. Death was consistent with hemorrhagic shock occurring within minutes of initial contact. Jonel was transported to a regional hospital and survived after emergency surgery, left with permanent nerve damage in the forearm and significant muscle loss in the calf. The service corridor was cleaned before morning operations. Security footage was duplicated internally before collection by authorities. Coverage never extended beyond a short local report. The lodge received a quiet fine and fenced the trash pit weeks later, a corrective measure directly prompted by the recorded footage. It was November 3, 2015, on the flat outskirts of La Pampa, Argentina. The morning looked ordinary from a distance, but the loosened boards on a neighbor's property and the restless movements caught on a farm camera hinted at a day already shifting in a direction no one recognized soon enough. Elsa Benavides, 72, had lived alone since her husband's death nearly a decade earlier. She kept a small poultry shed behind her house, raising hens and a few ducks for local egg sales. Her routine was set. She fed the birds shortly after sunrise, checked the fencing, then prepared her deliveries for the week. She maintained her land on her own, moving slowly but reliably through the same path she had walked every day for years. Her property bordered that of Rodolfo Linares, who kept a collection of exotic birds he purchased from informal markets. Among them were two rheas, a male and a female, kept in an improvised enclosure made of mismatched boards and rusted nails. Rheas, native to South America and standing up to 5 feet tall, are powerful birds with strong legs capable of delivering forward kicks with sharp claws. Males are known for territorial aggression, using stamping, pecking, and wing spreading to intimidate or drive off threats. Their kicks can generate enough force to fracture bone, and their behavior shifts quickly when startled or when defending space. Elsa had voiced concerns about the structure months before. Linares always said he would reinforce it when he had time. One local farmer reported seeing a loose board on the ground near Rodolfo's property line at dawn, but assumed Rodolfo would notice and fix it. The rheas themselves had displayed agitation in previous weeks, pacing and scraping their claws along the boards when dogs wandered close to the fence, a pattern that often intensifies during the spring breeding period. That morning, Elsa had planned to finish feeding her chickens before starting her usual housekeeping tasks. Elsa likely heard irregular movement from their enclosure overnight, but accustomed to farm sounds, paid little attention. When she stepped outside with her feed bucket, the silence of her yard felt normal, not threatening. By 7:40 a.m., the farm CCTV mounted on the side of Elsa's chicken shed recorded both Rias stepping through a collapsed corner of the neighboring enclosure. They crossed into her yard with heads raised, moving with a quick, deliberate gait. Elsa, walking ahead toward the shed, did not look back. She opened the door, set the bucket down, and reached for the metal water pan. Her position, bent forward, focused on her task, left her unaware of the male Rhea approaching from behind. Wings lifted in a spread posture indicating agitation consistent with late spring territorial stress. The male Rhea charged as she crouched to refill the pan. The first strike came from his forward kick, the clawed foot hitting the center of her back and knocking her chest first into the dirt. The impact forced her arms outward, and she landed on her side before rolling onto her stomach. She tried to push herself up, but the second kick landed across her ribs, driving her down again. The camera captured dust scattering around her as the bird stepped forward with its full weight, stamping repeatedly along her upper back and neck. Each downward force pushed her face deeper into the soil, her arms shifting in short, reflexive motions. She attempted to crawl toward the open shed door, dragging one knee forward, but the Rhea closed the distance in 2 quick steps and struck her jaw with a sideways kick. The blow flipped her onto her side, her legs folding beneath her. As she lay partially curled, the bird delivered another set of stomps, now aimed along her shoulder and neck. The male Rhea lowered his head and began pecking at her scalp and ears, while continuing to press down with his feet, a behavior documented in retites when an intruder is no longer upright but still within perceived territory. The footage showed her movements slowing, then reducing to only small shifts of her hand. At approximately 45 seconds from the first kick, a duration consistent with brief but intense retite attacks, she stopped moving entirely. The male Rhea continued pacing around her, occasionally lowering his head as if to inspect her, while the female remained several yards away, keeping distance as expected of non-aggressive female Rheas. At 7:52 a.m., a farmhand employed by Elsa arrived for the morning's chores and saw the male Rhea pacing near the shed doorway. He stayed at a distance, recognizing the danger of approaching a distressed or aggressive Rhea. Unable to see Elsa clearly from where he stood, but aware that something was wrong, he called the police. First responders reached the property about 13 minutes later, slowed by the distance from town and by needing confirmation that animal control was en route. They found Elsa on the dirt near the shed entrance, with clear impressions in the soil indicating the force and direction of the repeated stomps. She was declared deceased at the scene. The medical examiner later summarized Elsa's death as the result of severe blunt force trauma. The repeated kicks and stomps from the male Rhea caused multiple rib fractures, punctured lungs, and significant head and neck injuries. Injuries aligned with known capabilities of large ratites when attacking a downed, vulnerable person. Animal control captured both Rheas later that morning. News of the incident spread through the small community, prompting a brief local protest demanding stricter enclosure enforcement for exotic birds. It was September 3, 2017, when Kester Braid arrived in the remote Pantanal wetlands of Mato Grosso, Brazil, armed with his camera equipment and an ambitious plan to document wildlife behavior during the dry season. The 29-year-old freelance wildlife videographer had been commissioned by a conservation research team to capture footage of seasonal prey movement near the shrinking waterways. The Pantanal was experiencing one of its most severe dry periods in decades, concentrating wildlife around the remaining water sources in unprecedented numbers. Kester had built his reputation on getting closer to his subjects than most photographers dared. His assistant operated a drone from a safe distance while Kester worked at ground level, often positioning himself mere meters from active wildlife corridors. The research team had briefed him on recent jaguar activity in the area, with fresh tracks discovered along the muddy riverbanks just days before his arrival. They had warned him explicitly about working alone near dense vegetation during dawn and dusk hours when jaguars were most active. The morning had already yielded promising footage of caimans, capybaras, and various bird species. Kester's assistant monitored the drone feed from base camp while maintaining radio contact, though dense vegetation often interrupted communication. The videographer had established a pattern of working alone at the water's edge, dismissing concerns about the proximity to known jaguar territories. His previous assignments in African wildlife reserves had given him what he believed was an intuitive understanding of predator behavior. The jaguar represents South America's apex predator, possessing the strongest relative bite force of any big cat. Adult jaguars can crush the skulls of caimans and pierce turtle shells with ease. Unlike other big cats that typically target the throat, jaguars often kill by crushing the skull with a single devastating bite. These ambush predators rely on stealth and explosive power, often launching attacks from concealed positions near water sources. Kester made his fatal mistake when he positioned himself at the very edge of the riverbank, crouched low behind dense reed cover to frame his shot of capybaras drinking on the opposite bank. What he didn't know was that a large jaguar had been resting in the thick vegetation directly behind him. No more than 3 meters away, the cat had likely bedded down in the cool reeds hours earlier, and Kester's approach had been so focused on his subjects across the water that he'd walked right past the concealed predator without detecting it. His crouched, prey-like movements and sudden proximity likely triggered a defensive predatory response in the surprised animal. The drone had been circling overhead at high altitude for wide establishing shots when the attack began. The assistant later reported hearing Kester's startled cry through the radio before communication cut off. The drone's elevated position provided only fragmented glimpses through canopy gaps, brief moments of explosive movement, a flash of spotted coat, and violent thrashing of reeds before the scene disappeared beneath vegetation. The attack came with explosive suddenness as the jaguar launched itself from its concealed position, covering the short distance in a single powerful surge. The cat's muscular frame struck Kester with tremendous force, knocking him sideways into the shallow water with a tremendous splash. The impact alone was devastating, the sudden ambush from less than a meter away giving him no time to react. As Kester struggled in the knee-deep water, disoriented and gasping, the jaguar repositioned itself with predatory precision. The killing bite came moments later as the jaguar clamped its massive jaws around Kester's skull and upper neck area. The crushing pressure was immediate and catastrophic, with the cat's powerful canine teeth penetrating deep into the cranium. The jaguar's bite force compressed and fractured the skull, causing massive trauma to the brain. Kester's body convulsed violently for several seconds, his limbs jerking in involuntary spasms as the predator maintained its grip. His breathing became labored and irregular, harsh gasps escaping between clenched teeth as his nervous system fought against the devastating injuries. The movements gradually weakened, becoming sporadic twitches before his body finally went still, the catastrophic cranial trauma overwhelming his neurological system. The jaguar held its position for nearly 30 seconds after the last movement ceased, ensuring its prey was truly incapacitated before releasing its grip. The jaguar adjusted its position, dragging Kester's now motionless body, repositioning slightly into the reeds. The cat's powerful shoulder muscles rippled beneath its spotted coat as it pulled the dead weight through the muddy shallows. The cat's instincts drove it to secure its kill in cover, away from potential scavengers or threats. Blood spread through the shallow water in the dark, expanding clouds as the jaguar pulled its prey into the reeds. The entire attack, from first contact to final disappearance into cover, lasted less than 2 minutes. When Kester failed to respond to radio calls, his assistant redirected the drone to his last known position, but the dense canopy blocked any view. Upon reaching the site 40 minutes later, the assistant found Kester's scattered equipment and drag marks leading into impenetrable vegetation. Authorities later determined from limited drone footage, audio recordings, and ground evidence that Kester had unknowingly approached a resting jaguar at point-blank range. The official autopsy report listed the cause of death as catastrophic cranial trauma, with penetrating skull fractures and severe brain injury resulting from a jaguar bite to the head. The investigation revealed that Kester had violated several safety protocols, including maintaining safe distances from predator corridors and working without immediate backup. Brazilian authorities implemented stricter guidelines for wildlife photographers in jaguar habitat, requiring mandatory safety briefings and minimum 2-person teams in high-risk zones. It was October 8, 2016, and the morning air in South Luangwa National Park carried the crisp coolness that came just before the Zambian heat settled in for the day. The Mopane woodland stretched endlessly in every direction, prime leopard territory where experienced guides knew constant vigilance was required. Daniel Kowalski checked his rifle one final time, running through the safety protocols he'd performed hundreds of times before. At 31 years old, the professional safari guide had spent 7 years leading walking safaris through some of Africa's most dangerous terrain. That morning, Daniel was leading a group of 4 tourists, 2 couples, one from Germany and one from the United States. Werner Schmidt was filming continuously with a handheld camcorder. The group had been walking for over an hour when Daniel spotted fresh leopard tracks pressed into soft sand near a dry riverbed. Leopards were notoriously elusive, and sightings were rare enough to be considered the highlight of any trip. Daniel decided to follow the tracks, hoping to give his clients a glimpse from a safe distance. Werner's footage shows the group moving in single file. After some time, Daniel raised his hand in a stop signal. The camera zooms in, showing a male leopard well ahead, feeding on an impala carcass in tall grass. For a couple of minutes, the leopard fed, apparently unaware. Then it stopped, its head lifted, ears rotating forward, the leopard's eyes locked onto the group. Daniel instructed the group to back away slowly. The leopard stood, abandoned the carcass, and began walking toward them. Deliberate, purposeful steps. Its body language was tense, ears flat, tail twitching. Leopards are Africa's most adaptable big cats, weighing up to 200 pounds with bite forces strong enough to crush bone. Unlike lions, which sometimes use mock charges as warnings, leopards are more likely to either retreat completely or commit fully to an attack, especially when defending a fresh kill. When a leopard perceives a threat to its food source, its response can escalate to lethal violence in seconds. Within moments, the leopard charged. It broke into a full sprint, covering ground with explosive speed. Daniel fired toward the ground near the leopard, hoping to turn it. The leopard didn't stop. At a fresh kill, the gunshot only reinforced the leopard's perception of threat. At close range, Daniel fired again, aiming to wound. The shot went wide. The leopard launched itself at Daniel in a single leap. Werner's footage becomes chaotic. When the camera steadies, it shows Daniel on the ground with the leopard on top of him. The animal's jaws clamped onto Daniel's left shoulder, its rear claws raking his torso. Robert Chen, one of the tourists, ran forward with a hiking pole and struck the leopard. The animal released Daniel's shoulder momentarily and swiped at Robert. The leopard turned back to Daniel, its jaws clamping down on his throat. The bite was crushing, targeting the windpipe and major blood vessels. Daniel's body went limp beneath it. Werner's camera captures the leopard maintaining its grip for several more seconds before finally releasing him and sprinting back toward its kill. The entire attack lasted less than half a minute. The remaining tourists stood frozen, their training to remain still during wildlife encounters, overridden by what they'd just witnessed. Daniel lay motionless, his throat crushed, blood spreading across the ground. The leopard's bite had destroyed his airway and severed critical vessels. He lost consciousness within moments and died shortly after. Robert Chen, despite his attempt to help, was left with deep lacerations on his forearm from the leopard's defensive swipe, injuries that would require extensive treatment once they reached medical facilities. The tourists used Daniel's emergency beacon to radio for help. A rescue vehicle arrived within half an hour. Paramedics confirmed Daniel was dead at the scene. Authorities investigated using Werner's footage. Their analysis determined Daniel had followed all appropriate protocols, but had unknowingly approached too close to a leopard defending a fresh kill. The park classified it as defensive behavior. No action was taken against the leopard. Werner's footage was shared with safari guide training programs as a tragic example of how quickly leopard encounters can escalate. However, the most graphic portions showing the actual fatal bite and Daniel's final moments were edited out before any training use. Park officials and Daniel's employer agreed that while the footage had educational value, the full unedited version was too disturbing and would serve no additional purpose beyond what edited segments could provide.
It was July 28, 2016, and the cypress trees of Louisiana's Atchafalaya Basin cast long shadows across the dark water as Louis Boudreau navigated his aluminum boat through the narrow channels he'd fished since childhood. The 34-year-old commercial fisherman had been working these wetlands for over 15 years, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, who had made their living from the basin's abundant fish and crawfish populations. Louis had grown up in nearby Henderson, where knowledge of seasonal wildlife patterns was passed down through generations of fishermen and hunters. His extensive experience in the swamps had taught him to read water conditions, weather patterns, and animal behavior with the expertise that came from a lifetime spent in the wetlands. However, declining fish populations in his usual spots had forced Louis to venture into areas he typically avoided during certain times of the year. The area Louis chose that morning was a shallow cove surrounded by dense vegetation, known locally for its large bass and catfish populations. What Louis didn't fully consider was that late July marked the height of alligator nesting aggression, when female alligators become extremely territorial while guarding their nests and newly hatched young. The secluded location that made it perfect for fishing also made it ideal habitat for nesting alligators. American alligators are among North America's most powerful predators, with adult females reaching lengths of 8 to 10 feet and weighing up to 200 pounds. During nesting season, female alligators become extraordinarily aggressive, attacking anything that approaches their nesting sites or threatens their young. These prehistoric predators can remain completely submerged and motionless for extended periods, making them nearly invisible until they strike. Louis had been fishing successfully for several hours when he hooked what felt like a substantial bass. The fish fought with impressive strength, taking nearly 8 minutes to bring to the boat. As Louis finally landed the impressive catch, he realized this would be perfect evidence of his fishing skills to share with his regular customers at the local fish market. The bass was easily the largest he'd caught all season, and he wanted to document it properly. Louis anchored his boat in the shallow water near the shoreline and stepped into the knee-deep water to position himself for the photograph. He held the massive bass with one hand and pulled out his phone with the other, switching to the front-facing camera to capture a selfie with his impressive catch. The murky water made it impossible to see the bottom clearly, but Louis had waded in similar conditions countless times throughout his career. He extended his arm to get the best angle, trying to frame both himself and the trophy bass in the shot. Louis smiled broadly as he held the fish up beside his face, adjusting his position in the shallow water to get better lighting for the selfie. He wanted to capture the pride and satisfaction of landing such an exceptional bass in these challenging conditions. What Louis couldn't see beneath the dark water as he focused on his phone screen was the large female alligator that had been guarding her nest just yards away from where he stood. The alligator's attack came from directly below, as her powerful jaws clamped down on Louis's legs with bone-crushing force. The impact drove Louis backward into deeper water as the alligator began her death roll, a hunting technique designed to disorient prey and cause massive trauma. Louis's body spun violently in the muddy water as the alligator's powerful muscles twisted with devastating efficiency. The bass Louis had been holding flew from his hands as he struggled against the alligator's grip, his arms flailing desperately as he tried to reach the surface for air. The alligator's massive tail struck Louis repeatedly, delivering powerful blows that drove him deeper into the murky water. Her jaws maintained their crushing grip as she continued the death roll, her prehistoric instincts driving her to ensure the threat to her nest was completely eliminated. Louis's struggles gradually weakened as blood loss and drowning combined to overwhelm his system. The alligator maintained her attack until Louis's movements ceased entirely, then dragged his body toward the dense vegetation where her nest was concealed. The entire encounter lasted less than 5 minutes, leaving only ripples on the water's surface and Louis's empty boat drifting slowly away from shore. Louis's boat was discovered later that afternoon by another fisherman who noticed it floating unmanned in the main channel. Search and rescue teams launched an immediate operation, but the murky water and dense vegetation made recovery efforts extremely challenging. Louis's remains were finally located 3 days later by wildlife officials using specialized sonar equipment. The investigation confirmed that Louis had been fishing in an active alligator nesting area during peak nesting aggression, though the specific location wasn't marked with warning signs due to its remote nature. The responsible alligator was captured and removed from the area by wildlife officials. Louis's death prompted renewed efforts to educate commercial fishermen about seasonal alligator behavior and nesting patterns. But swamp predators weren't the only animals that could prove deadly to those who underestimated their territorial instincts. In the pristine wilderness of Glacier National Park, a camping enthusiast's desire for the perfect wildlife photograph would bring her dangerously close to one of North America's most powerful predators.
It was July 21st, 2017, on the lower Zambezi River in Zambia. The water ran high and opaque, swollen by seasonal flow and crowded with submerged sandbars, drifting reeds, and unseen channels beneath the surface. The air was heavy and still, broken only by insects and the slow movement of the river, a place where large animals held territory just below the waterline, and visibility ended inches beneath the surface. Sitting inside the canoe was Naledi Kojo, 34 years old, an administrative supervisor at a public secondary school outside Accra. Her work involved schedules, procurement paperwork, and disciplinary documentation, and co-workers described her as methodical and rule-focused. This was her first vacation outside West Africa, paid for over several years of savings, and taken after her children reached an age where extended travel was feasible. She traveled with her husband, Kwame, an electrical technician, and their 2 children, ages 9 and 11. Their itinerary avoided activities labeled high risk, with no walking safaris or night drives. The river canoe excursion was presented as routine and controlled, following established routes used daily. The launch briefing emphasized observation only, and nearby tourist boats were visible along the same stretch of river. The lower Zambezi that morning was flat, with slow surface movement masking depth and submerged channels, reflecting a pale sky with no visible current markers. Hippopotamuses are not passive river animals. Adults commonly weigh between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds, can run faster than a human over short distances on land, and are responsible for more fatal encounters in Africa than any other large mammal. They defend submerged pathways and pod zones aggressively and attack by surging upward from depth, using their jaws to crush rather than tear. The mouth can open nearly 5 feet wide, and the canines can exceed 20 inches. Light recreational watercraft offers no resistance to this force. There were visible warnings, captured in sequence on camera. A launch sign showing a hippo silhouette crossed by a red slash appeared in the opening frames, and earlier footage showed the guide redirecting another canoe that drifted too close to a pod downstream. Naledi noted hippos submerging one by one and asked about the behavior. The guide replied without turning, saying they were moving away. The canoe continued forward on residual glide. The water surface flattened abruptly, a change visible on camera within seconds. Reflected light vanished as ripples collapsed into a dull, uniform plane. No bubbles or wake appeared. The children leaned into frame as the guide lifted his paddle briefly, paused, then lowered it again. The hippopotamus breached directly beneath the canoe, entering the frame from below with no lateral approach. The head rose vertically, jaws opening as it broke the surface. The lower mandible contacted the underside of the hull first, lifting it, while the upper jaw closed through the canoe's centerline. The fiberglass failed instantly. The bow folded inward, and the image jolted as the hull separated. Her torso driven upward while her hips and legs dropped below the waterline. The jaws closed once, producing a dense, compressed impact sound, consistent with bone and hull failure. Naledi's upper body was thrown forward and landed face down on the surface, motionless, while the lower half disappeared immediately as the animal submerged. There was no visible thrashing, and her arms remained slack. As the canoe collapsed, the footage shows her upper torso drifting and slowly rotating. Blood spread outward in a widening plume as the children screamed. Kwame entered the frame, attempting to secure broken canoe sections and calling her name, with no response visible. The guide entered the water on the opposite side and paddled backward to increase distance while calling for help. The hippopotamus surfaced again, roughly 60 feet away, exhaled audibly, then submerged. The camera recorded uninterrupted until the battery failed 12 minutes later, including the children's transfer to another canoe, and the guide pushing Naledi's remains away from the boats to prevent further contact. The guide radioed base immediately. Other boats arrived in approximately 18 minutes. No recovery attempt was made due to the presence of the animal and the condition of the remains. Rangers secured the area and escorted the family to shore. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as complete spinal transection at the L1 vertebra, with catastrophic vascular disruption. Death would have occurred instantly. No defensive injuries were documented. River operations were suspended for 3 days. The footage was collected by park authorities and used internally for training. Naledi Kojo's name appeared once in a regional paper in a brief notice. Her family returned home without her. Operating distances were formally revised, and enforcement during seasonal pod movement was recorded as mandatory rather than advisory. It was March 19, 2016, in Limpopo Province, South Africa. The roadside plain and the air around the small animal attraction seemed too still for the number of people moving through it. The place operated on routines that had worn thin long before anyone noticed. Rena Valum, 17, had traveled from Johannesburg to visit relatives during her school break. She was known among friends as careful but curious, someone who paid attention yet pushed forward when something interested her. Her relatives suggested the roadside zoo as a trivial stop, the kind of place tourists sometimes visited for quick photos. She wanted an image of a lioness up close for her project, something she thought would make the assignment feel more grounded and local. The parking lot sat between the main road and a stretch of dry bushveld where dust moved in short, uneven swirls across patches of sand. She was aware the attraction was unpolished, but she viewed it as a harmless excursion. The small structures, faded signs, and low, improvised wire barriers, approximately 3 feet high, which did not meet regulatory safety standards, did not strike her as dangerous, only outdated. Her cousin reassured her that people came here every weekend without issue. Visitors the week prior told relatives of Rena's family that the keepers rarely stayed outside, choosing instead to linger in a shed where they prepared feed. Rena saw no staff outside when she entered the grounds, but she assumed they were nearby. Her cousin noticed the lioness watching them through the shade, but did not interpret the gaze as threatening. Big cats often appear calm even when preparing to act. Lionesses can weigh over 260 pounds and generate substantial pulling force with their forelimbs and jaws, capable of dragging large prey by bracing their bodies and using explosive backward motion. Their predatory behavior includes silent approaches, sudden bursts of strength, and repositioning bites to secure vital areas such as the neck and upper chest. CCTV captured Rena and her friends passing through the parking lot toward the lion enclosure, with Rena stepping closer to the unstable wire barrier, while the others remained several feet behind. She leaned forward to angle her phone downward toward the lioness resting under the overhang. She extended her right arm slightly beyond the top rail, trying to lower the camera enough to avoid the glare. At that moment, the lioness rose silently from the shade, closing the distance with a few slow steps. No one reacted in time. The lioness hooked Rena's forearm between two of the wire strands with a quick forward snap, then closed her jaws around the arm just below the elbow. The force was immediate. The animal pulled backward with its full body, bracing its weight and dragging Rena toward the fence. Her feet slipped on the dust-slick ground, and the lower rail flexed outward under tension. The sagging section of wire gave way enough for her arm and shoulder to be pulled through, creating a narrow gap for her body to follow. She was drawn fully into the enclosure with another powerful tug. Rena fell onto her side inside the enclosure, partially twisted, with her legs still close to the barrier. The lioness released her arm only long enough to clamp down on her upper shoulder and neck, jaws shifting until it secured a deeper grip. CCTV showed the lioness bracing with its forepaws pressed to the ground, pulling backward with steady force. Her friends grabbed Rena's legs, trying to counter the pull, but released instantly when the lioness let out a short guttural sound and pulled harder, wrenching Rena's body fully into the enclosure. Her shoes scraped along the ground as she was dragged about 4 to 5 feet from the fence. The lioness pinned her by placing both forepaws across her upper torso and neck, using her full body weight to keep Rena from moving. The animal repositioned its jaws several times, first around the clavicle, then higher along the side of her throat, adjusting to secure a suffocating hold typical of large felid predation and consistent with documented lion attack mechanics. Rena's cousin attempted to approach the fence but backed away when the lioness turned its head sharply while maintaining its hold. The enclosure remained unmonitored. No keepers emerged from the shed during the entire sequence recorded on the camera. A fruit stand vendor across the lot called emergency services at 2:11 p.m., reporting that a visitor had been pulled inside the enclosure. Help arrived 9 minutes later, but staff informed responders that they had no suitable firearms and had never been trained to manage an emergency involving a lion. Responders waited for specialized animal control before attempting entry, following protocol to minimize risk. By the time they reached Rena, she showed no signs of life. The autopsy concluded that Rena Valum died from severe trauma caused by a large predator. The lioness's bites and pulls caused multiple fractures to her upper arm, shoulder, and clavicle, along with crushing injuries to her neck and chest, consistent with the weight and grip force of an adult lioness. The facility closed permanently in the following days, with regional authorities citing unsafe enclosures and lack of trained personnel. Rena's family held a small memorial service in Johannesburg as relatives collected her belongings from Limpopo. It was May 22, 2015, when Mixon Dworn and his 2 longtime friends ventured into the remote backwater canals of the Florida Everglades for what they believed would be an exciting wildlife exploration. The 41-year-old contractor from Tampa had taken a rare weekend off to join his friends on their annual adventure trip, eager to document the unique ecosystem that defined South Florida's wilderness. The group had driven deep into the restricted areas of the Everglades, following narrow dirt roads that led to isolated waterways rarely visited by tourists or park rangers. The morning air was thick with humidity as they parked near a series of interconnected canals that snaked through dense sawgrass and cypress stands. Mixon wore a chest-mounted GoPro camera to capture their exploration, while his friends carried additional recording equipment to document their wildlife encounters. Despite multiple warning signs posted throughout the area indicating active nesting and breeding season for alligators, the trio was determined to explore areas that promised more authentic wildlife footage than the popular tourist destinations. Mixon had limited experience navigating swamp terrain, relying on his more experienced friends to guide him through the treacherous landscape. The group had researched the area extensively online, drawn by reports of exceptional alligator activity in the narrow waterways. What they failed to fully comprehend was that late May represented peak aggression season for American alligators, when territorial males and protective females became extremely dangerous to any perceived threats. The canal they chose to explore was barely 20 feet wide, flanked by dense vegetation that created a natural corridor perfect for ambush predators. The American alligator stands as one of North America's most formidable apex predators, a living relic from the age of dinosaurs that has remained virtually unchanged for over 200 million years. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weigh over 1,000 pounds, with jaw muscles capable of generating among the most powerful bites ever recorded in a living reptile. Their hunting strategy relies on explosive ambush attacks, remaining motionless for hours before striking with lightning speed. During breeding season, alligators become extremely territorial and aggressive, viewing any intrusion into their domain as a direct threat requiring immediate elimination. Alligators are perfectly adapted for aquatic ambush hunting, with eyes, ears, and nostrils positioned on top of their skulls, allowing them to remain almost completely submerged while monitoring their surroundings. Once an alligator secures its grip, the infamous death roll begins, a spinning maneuver designed to disorient prey and tear away chunks of flesh. Mixon made his fatal mistake when he dropped his backup camera battery into the knee-deep water near a partially submerged log. Without hesitation, he waded into the canal to retrieve the expensive equipment, his chest-mounted GoPro continuing to record as he bent down to search the murky bottom. The water was dark with tannins and sediment, making it impossible to see more than a few inches below the surface. What Mixon failed to realize was that the submerged log he was approaching was actually a massive alligator that had been lying motionless, waiting for exactly this type of opportunity. The attack erupted from the water with terrifying suddenness as the enormous alligator exploded upward from its concealed position. The GoPro captured the initial strike before footage became chaotic and obscured as the reptile's massive jaws clamped down on Mixon's upper thigh and hip region with crushing force. The alligator's teeth, designed for gripping rather than cutting, penetrated deep into his leg and pelvis as the predator established its deadly hold. The bite force compressed muscle and tissue against bone, the crushing pressure building as the alligator secured its grip, causing catastrophic damage to vital structures in the pelvic region. Before Mixon could even process what was happening, the alligator initiated its signature death roll, spinning rapidly in the water while maintaining its vice-like bite. The rotational force compounded the damage as the alligator spun continuously, the twisting motion devastating soft tissue and stressing bone. Mixon's body was pulled completely underwater as the reptile continued its deadly maneuver, the dark water turning red with blood as the accumulated trauma intensified with each rotation. The GoPro camera's footage became completely unusable as the attack continued, preventing any clear documentation of the final moments as the death roll persisted. The alligator's powerful tail thrashed violently, creating a maelstrom of bubbles and debris as it worked to secure its kill. The spinning motion caused massive internal bleeding, while the crushing bite force prevented any possibility of escape. Mixon struggled desperately beneath the surface, his lungs burning as the alligator held him submerged, the death roll having inflicted injuries so severe that escape was impossible even as consciousness began to fade. The murky water concealed his final moments as the alligator maintained its relentless grip. Drowning claiming him as blood loss and trauma overwhelmed his body. The investigation revealed that the group had ignored multiple safety warnings and entered restricted areas during the most dangerous time of year for alligator encounters. Authorities increased patrol presence in the area following the incident, though the remote location continued to present enforcement challenges. The coroner's report determined the cause of death to be drowning and exsanguination due to massive traumatic injuries sustained from an alligator attack, with severe crushing trauma to the pelvis and femoral region, contributing to rapid blood loss. Mixon's family acknowledged the inherent risks of exploring dangerous wildlife areas. It was April 3, 2018, and the Namibian sun was already climbing toward its midday peak over Etosha National Park. The air shimmered with heat across the open plains, where scattered acacia trees provided the only shade for miles. Temperatures were pushing toward 100 degrees, and the dry season had left the landscape parched and dusty. Sophie Laurent adjusted the camera mounted on her chest harness. At 26 years old, the conservation volunteer from Lyon, France, had spent the past 4 months working with a small wildlife trust in Etosha, documenting black rhino populations. Black rhinos were critically endangered, with fewer than 5,500 remaining in the wild. That morning, Sophie was working with Dr. Peter Van Rooyen and Malcolm Hughes, a wildlife photographer. Their target was a female black rhino nicknamed Kaya, Swahili for home, who had recently given birth to her second calf. Malcolm was filming with a professional-grade video camera. The team approached in a modified Land Rover, staying inside the vehicle as per strict park protocols. They parked a good distance from where Kaya and her calf were resting beneath an acacia tree. Malcolm's footage shows Kaya lying on her side, the calf nursing. After several minutes of observation, Kaya stood abruptly, her ears rotated forward, nostrils flaring. The calf scrambled to its feet. What happened next was unexpected. Sophie's door, which she had left slightly ajar for better air circulation, swung fully open. A strong gust of wind caught it, and the door banged against the vehicle's side panel with a sharp metallic clang. Kaya reacted instantly. She lowered her head, horn pointing forward, and charged toward the sound. Dr. Van Rooyen called out for Sophie to close the door and told their driver, Johannes Amukoshi, to drive. Johannes started the engine and began accelerating, but the Land Rover was slow to build speed on the soft sand. Black rhinos are among the most dangerous animals in Africa, capable of weighing up to 3,000 pounds. Despite their massive bulk, they can run at speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour, faster than most humans can sprint. Their horn can gore and kill with devastating efficiency. When protecting their young, black rhino mothers become living weapons. Though their eyesight is poor, they charge aggressively toward any perceived threat, using sound and movement to guide them. Sophie lunged for her door, trying to pull it shut, but the wind resistance made it difficult. The door swung partially closed, then banged open again. Sophie was leaning out, both hands gripping the door handle. Kaya reached the vehicle in seconds. Her horn struck the open door with tremendous force, tearing it partially free. Sophie, still gripping the handle, was pulled halfway out of the moving vehicle. Malcolm's camera shows Sophie dangling from the Land Rover's side. Dr. Van Rooyen grabbed her arms, trying to pull her back in. Johannes accelerated harder, the vehicle bouncing violently. The damaged door continued to bang and swing, creating more noise and movement. Kaya charged again at the moving vehicle, her massive bulk slamming into the side. The impact caught Sophie's exposed body, and the force knocked her completely free. She hit the ground hard. Kaya stood her ground nearby, snorting aggressively, her calf safely positioned behind her. The rhino's behavior was textbook maternal defense. She made no attempt to pursue the vehicle further, instead positioning herself between her calf and the perceived danger. Dr. Van Rooyen called out from the vehicle as he watched Sophie's motionless form on the ground, knowing they couldn't approach while Kaya remained in defensive posture. Malcolm's camera captured the moment as Johannes slammed on the brakes. Dr. Van Rooyen reached for the emergency radio. Even from the vehicle, the severity of Sophie's injuries was apparent. The team was forced to wait, unable to provide any medical assistance while the protective mother rhino stood guard. Kaya remained in the area for several minutes, preventing any approach. Only when satisfied did she slowly back away, guiding her calf toward the acacia tree. Johannes carefully maneuvered closer. Dr. Van Rooyen and Malcolm rushed to Sophie's side. She was unconscious, barely breathing, with massive trauma to her torso. Blood pooled rapidly beneath her. Dr. Van Rooyen applied pressure and attempted CPR, but the internal damage was too severe. Sophie died at the scene before the medical helicopter could arrive. The cause of death was massive internal trauma and hemorrhaging. Etosha National Park officials reviewed Malcolm's footage. Their report concluded that the door malfunction created an unpredictable situation that triggered Kaya's protective instincts. The charge was classified as defensive maternal behavior. No action was taken against Kaya. Park protocols were updated to require all vehicle doors to be secured with safety straps during rhino observations. The footage from both Malcolm's camera and Sophie's chest-mounted camera was retained by Namibian wildlife authorities for their official investigation. After the investigation concluded, the footage was sealed and never released publicly. Officials cited the ongoing need to protect the identities and privacy of conservation workers in the field, noting that releasing such graphic content could discourage future volunteers from participating in critical endangered species research.
It was June 8, 2014, and the morning mist clung to the valleys of Glacier National Park as Emily Harper emerged from her tent to witness one of the most spectacular sunrises of her life. The 30-year-old marketing executive from Seattle had been planning this camping trip with her partner for over a year, saving vacation time and researching the best hiking trails and camping spots in Montana's crown jewel. This was Emily's first visit to grizzly bear country, though she had extensive hiking experience throughout the Pacific Northwest. Emily and her partner had attended the mandatory bear safety briefing at the park's visitor center 2 days earlier, where rangers had emphasized the critical importance of maintaining at least 100 yards distance from grizzly bears at all times. The couple had been diligent about following food storage protocols and making noise while hiking, but Emily had been disappointed by their lack of wildlife sightings during their first 2 days in the park. As Emily prepared breakfast at their campsite in the Apgar area, she spotted movement in the meadow approximately 200 yards away. Through her binoculars, she could clearly see a large grizzly bear foraging for roots and berries in the early morning light. Grizzly bears are among North America's most powerful predators, with adult bears weighing between 300 and 800 pounds, depending on the season and food availability. These omnivores possess incredible strength and can run up to 35 miles per hour despite their massive size. Grizzlies have poor eyesight but exceptional hearing and smell, making them highly sensitive to sudden movements or unfamiliar sounds. Emily's excitement about finally encountering a grizzly bear in its natural habitat overrode the safety training she had received just days earlier. She grabbed her camera and began moving slowly toward the meadow, believing that the bear's apparent focus on feeding would allow her to get closer for better photographs. Her partner was still sleeping in their tent, unaware of Emily's decision to approach the dangerous predator alone. Emily managed to close the distance to approximately 75 yards before the grizzly became aware of her presence, but her desire for a more dramatic photograph pushed her closer still. When she reached what she believed was a safe distance of about 50 yards, Emily switched her phone to selfie mode, wanting to capture herself with the massive bear visible behind her. She took several photos, each time stepping incrementally closer. By the time Emily closed the distance to roughly 30 yards, the bear's behavior changed. The grizzly lifted its head, huffed sharply, and flattened its ears against its skull, clear warning signals that Emily failed to recognize. When the bear charged, it covered the remaining distance in seconds. Emily turned to flee but slipped on dew-soaked grass and fell forward just as the bear reached her. The grizzly struck her with overwhelming force, knocking her to the ground and delivering a rapid defensive mauling. Powerful bites and crushing blows from its massive paws caused catastrophic injuries within seconds. After less than 30 seconds, the bear disengaged and retreated toward the tree line, its defensive instincts satisfied. Emily's partner discovered her body 15 minutes later, after being awakened by the sounds of the attack. Park rangers arrived within 20 minutes of the emergency call, but Emily's massive injuries made any medical intervention impossible. The responsible grizzly was tracked and identified through DNA evidence, but wildlife officials determined the bear had been defending itself against human encroachment and made no attempt to destroy the animal. The incident prompted immediate reviews of bear safety education programs and campground placement policies throughout Glacier National Park. However, terrestrial predators weren't the only animals that could turn deadly when humans misjudged their behavior patterns. Off the coast of Florida, a marine biology student's academic knowledge would prove insufficient when faced with one of the ocean's most unpredictable predators in its natural hunting environment.
It was November 8, 2014, at the edge of a mid-range safari lodge in Botswana's Okavango Delta. Night had settled in, and the air was heavy with heat and insects. Floodlights cut narrow paths through the darkness, leaving wide stretches of bush in shadow. Beyond the lit walkways, Tall grass and shallow water blurred together, alive with movement and unseen wildlife just outside the lodge's open perimeter. One of the safari guests that week was Peter Voss, 52, a regional machinery sales representative from South Africa, who spent most of the year driving between farming towns selling industrial compressors and irrigation pumps. He was not publicly known and maintained no active online presence. Co-workers described him as reliable during working hours and excessive after them, drinking heavily at trade shows and treating company trips as opportunities to abandon routine limits. The safari was awarded after he closed a difficult regional contract, 4 nights at a Delta lodge with guided vehicle drives included. Peter showed no documented interest in wildlife activities and treated the trip primarily as a social event centered on alcohol consumption rather than scheduled excursions or guided viewing. He arrived with 11 co-workers, none personally close. By the 3rd night, multiple witnesses later described him as visibly intoxicated, lingering near the fire pit after dinner, while others returned to their rooms. He skipped the afternoon game drive and spent several hours drinking. Staff stopped serving him alcohol earlier in the evening, after which he returned carrying additional alcohol from his room. Security footage later showed him walking alone toward movement near the unfenced boundary without staff accompaniment. The lodge sat on open delta terrain, floodplains giving way to tall grass and scattered acacia, with no physical barrier separating guest walkways from active wildlife corridors. November nights remained warm. Insects were active, and the ground, compacted by foot traffic, retained surface moisture from receding seasonal floodwater. Solitary bull elephants routinely moved through the area after sunset, following established paths between feeding zones and water access points. Adult bull elephants can exceed 12,000 pounds and are capable of rapid acceleration over short distances, reaching speeds near 25 miles per hour. Solitary males are more likely to investigate unfamiliar light, sound, or movement, and escalation risk increases when stimulation continues. A single forefoot can exert several tons of downward force. Documented warning behaviors include ear extension, head shaking, foot stamping, and short false charges intended to drive threats away without contact. When those signals fail, physical engagement follows immediately and forcefully. Earlier that evening, staff instructed guests to remain within illuminated paths after dark. A ranger radio message confirmed that a bull elephant had been observed moving south of the lodge less than an hour earlier. When Peter reached the edge of the lit area, several co-workers noticed a large silhouette and stepped back. The elephant moved partially into view, ears extended outward. Peter raised his phone and activated the flashlight, directing the beam toward the animal's head while shouting incoherently. The elephant advanced several yards and stopped, stamping once. That false charge prompted everyone else to retreat. Peter remained where he was and raised the phone again. The fixed security camera captured the escalation in a single wide frame. The elephant accelerated without further display, closing the remaining distance in seconds. Peter turned only as the animal reached him. The elephant struck with its head and shoulder mass, knocking him backward onto the compacted ground. He fell supine, arms failing to brace his fall. The bull immediately stepped forward and trampled. The first forefoot came down across the upper torso, compressing the chest. The footage shows visible collapse of the ribcage under the animal's weight. Peter's legs kicked briefly, then went slack. The elephant shifted its stance and brought a second step down across the midsection, driving force into the abdomen and pelvis. Blood appeared at the mouth and nose almost immediately, spreading onto the ground beneath his head. The elephant continued forward momentum rather than pausing. A final step landed across the lower chest and shoulder area as the animal moved over him, crushing remaining thoracic structure. Peter's body did not rise or roll. There was no coordinated movement after the second impact. The bull did not vocalize, trumpet, or linger. It continued along its established path into the grass beyond the lodge, exiting the frame within seconds. No one approached until the elephant was fully out of view. A lodge manager contacted wildlife authorities and emergency medical services via satellite phone, and guests were instructed to remain indoors. Dispatch records later confirmed responders were mobilized within 3 minutes. Rangers and paramedics arrived 27 minutes after the incident. Peter was pronounced dead at the scene, with no resuscitation attempted due to catastrophic trauma. A subsequent coroner report listed the cause of death as massive blunt force trauma from trampling, including extensive rib fractures, internal organ rupture, and secondary cranial injury from ground impact. Death was assessed to have occurred within seconds of initial chest compression. Toxicology results showed a significantly elevated blood alcohol concentration. In the days that followed, the lodge cooperated with authorities and reviewed the footage internally. Coverage remained limited to a brief local notice describing a wildlife-related fatality. Peter's family declined public comment. The lodge installed additional perimeter lighting, reinforced guest movement restrictions, and imposed stricter nighttime alcohol controls. The security camera remained in place, continuing to record without modification. It was September 8, 2017, in a small tourist elephant camp east of Chiang Mai, Thailand. The day had begun without urgency, but a few handlers later said the bull elephant had been restless since dawn, shifting his weight and raising dust in slow, agitated strokes. Krit Sorasun, 28, had been hired less than a month earlier, a stopgap job after leaving warehouse work outside Lampin. The camp relied on men like him, workers who came in needing steady income more than training. His reputation among the older handlers was that he listened carefully, but lacked the instinctive caution that came with years around elephants. He lived in a small rented room nearby and had been saving money to send home to his younger sister for school fees. His short time on the job meant most assignments were simple: carry feed, sweep walkways, prepare the sugarcane bundles for the tourist groups. He had watched the older men use small firecrackers to clear birds from the feed area and copied the habit without thinking much about the risks. The method was crude, but common enough that new staff assumed it was acceptable. Krit had been told broadly to stay cautious around the camp's largest bull, Thong, but the warning had become background noise after repeated exposure to the elephant's generally calm behavior during the early hours. Asian bull elephants can weigh more than 10,000 pounds, and their tusks, sometimes over 3 feet long, function both as tools and weapons. Bulls under stress may react unpredictably, shifting from stillness to full-force aggression without visible transition. A bull's trunk and forelegs can also deliver crushing force, especially when combined with tusk strikes, sufficient to severely injure or kill an adult human. That morning, a noisy tourist group had passed through earlier than scheduled, clapping and shouting near the paddock. A senior caretaker later said the bull had been rotating his head repeatedly, a behavior indicating overstimulation. Krit noticed the elephant's posture, but assumed the shift in weight was routine. His focus stayed on the birds tearing at the sugarcane, and he prepared the small firecracker the same way he had seen others do. As captured by the rear-mounted CCTV, the firecracker snapped with a sharp pop. Thong jolted immediately, ears spreading wide, trunk curling inward before swinging forward. Krit turned at the sound of the elephant's movement, took a half-step backward and tried to run, but his knees buckled, and he went down hard. The bull closed the distance in seconds. Its trunk swung downward in a tight arc, striking Krit between the shoulders and flattening him onto the ground. Dust and mud scattered under the impact. Before Krit could shift the elephant drove its left tusk into his lower torso, lifting him several inches off the ground. His body angled sideways, legs rigid from the sudden upward motion. The CCTV footage shows the moment the tusk withdrew. Blood darkened the soil almost immediately. Krit tried to roll away, but his movements were slow, uncoordinated, more reflex than intention. Thong pressed a foreleg into his upper torso, combining trunk, tusk, and body weight to deliver blunt force trauma. The elephant leaned forward, then adjusted its stance, its right tusk sweeping in a lateral motion common in agitated bulls. The tip tore across Krit's left side, dragging him several inches through the mud. Nearby handlers shouted off camera, but none could approach. The elephant's posture remained defensive, swaying side to side while guarding the space around the injured man. For nearly half a minute, the bull held its stance, preventing anyone from getting close. Each shift of weight pushed Krit further into the mud, leaving a clear imprint of the elephant's forefoot beside him. When the animal finally stepped away, it remained near the feed piles, pacing with short, agitated movements. A caretaker ran to call emergency services at 10:04 a.m., but the rural road conditions delayed the ambulance. Paramedics arrived 15 minutes later, navigating narrow, unpaved roads, and found Krit unresponsive. He was declared deceased before transport. The provincial medical examiner concluded that Krit Sorasun died from severe blunt force trauma caused by an elephant. The injuries included multiple broken ribs, crushed internal organs, and lacerations from tusk strikes. The combination of tusk, trunk, and body weight resulted in rapid internal bleeding and trauma sufficient to kill within minutes. It was August 11, 2018, when Tally Spake and her hiking partner set out on a remote backcountry trail in Banff National Park, Canada, seeking the perfect footage for her growing travel blog. The 33-year-old content creator had built a substantial following by documenting off-the-beaten-path adventures, always searching for locations that offered authentic wilderness experiences, away from crowded tourist destinations. The couple had chosen a lesser-known trail that wound through dense forest and alpine meadows, promising spectacular mountain vistas and abundant wildlife opportunities. They had arrived at the trailhead before dawn, eager to capture the golden morning light filtering through the ancient pines. The morning had started with perfect conditions as they departed from the trailhead, with Tally's Insta360 action camera capturing continuous footage of their journey through the pristine Canadian Rockies. Park notices posted at multiple locations warned of recent grizzly bear sightings throughout the area, with rangers emphasizing the importance of making noise while hiking and carrying bear spray. However, Tally and her partner were focused on creating content that showcased the untamed beauty of the wilderness, prioritizing compelling footage over cautionary measures that might interrupt their filming. The trail they had selected was known among experienced hikers for its challenging terrain and limited foot traffic, factors that made it particularly appealing to Tally's brand of adventure documentation. Fresh bear tracks were visible in the soft earth along several sections of the path, while disturbed vegetation and claw marks on tree bark provided clear evidence of recent grizzly activity. As they progressed deeper into the backcountry, the trail became increasingly narrow and winding, with dense undergrowth limiting visibility around corners and bends. The thick forest canopy created shadows that danced across the path, while the silence of the wilderness was broken only by the occasional bird call and the sound of their footsteps on the earthen trail. The grizzly bear represents North America's most formidable land predator, with adult males weighing up to 800 pounds and possessing the strength to overturn boulders weighing several hundred pounds. These massive omnivores can reach speeds of 35 miles per hour in short bursts, easily outrunning any human attempting to flee. Grizzly bears have an exceptional sense of smell, capable of detecting scents from miles away, and their hearing is equally acute. During late summer, grizzlies enter hyperphagia, consuming up to 20,000 calories per day to prepare for winter hibernation, making them more aggressive and territorial as they desperately seek to accumulate fat reserves. A grizzly's claws can measure up to 4 inches in length, designed for digging but equally effective as weapons capable of inflicting devastating wounds. Their bite force exceeds 1,200 pounds per square inch, with massive canine teeth that can crush bones and tear through muscle with ease. When threatened or surprised, grizzly bears typically charge at full speed, using their enormous bulk and powerful limbs to overwhelm perceived threats. Tally made her fatal mistake when she rounded a sharp bend in the trail without making any noise to announce their presence. The Insta360 camera captured the initial moment of encounter as a massive grizzly bear appeared directly ahead, less than 30 feet away. The bear had been foraging in a berry patch just off the trail when the hikers surprised it, triggering an immediate defensive response. The animal's ears flattened against its head as it assessed the threat, its massive frame blocking the narrow trail completely. A low growl rumbled from deep within its chest as it rose to its full imposing height. The attack began with explosive speed as the grizzly charged forward, covering the distance between them in seconds. The camera recorded the terrifying approach before being knocked from Tally's grip during the initial impact, the device tumbling into dense undergrowth where it continued recording muffled audio of the brutal assault. The bear immediately pounced on Tally's fallen form, using its full body weight to pin her to the ground. The grizzly's massive claws raked across her torso and limbs as the animal delivered a series of powerful blows. In approximately 45 seconds of ferocious attack, the bear inflicted catastrophic damage to Tally's upper body with crushing strikes from its paws and devastating bites to her head, face, and shoulder area. The grizzly's teeth tore through her scalp and facial structures, while its claws caused massive blunt trauma to her chest and shoulders, resulting in severe internal bleeding and crushing injuries to vital organs. The bear shook Tally violently with powerful head movements, the rapid yet overwhelming mauling destroying her body's ability to sustain life. Her partner, who had managed to retreat during the initial charge, could only listen helplessly to the sounds of the attack from his position behind a large tree. After less than a minute of sustained violence, the grizzly finally disengaged from Tally's motionless form and moved away from the area. The bear's defensive response had been thorough and devastating, driven by instinct rather than predatory behavior. Her partner waited several more minutes before cautiously approaching to recover the damaged camera, which had captured the audio of the entire horrific encounter. The investigation revealed that the couple had failed to follow basic bear safety protocols, hiking silently through prime grizzly habitat without bear spray or noise-making devices. The official autopsy determined the cause of death to be exsanguination and multiple blunt force trauma injuries sustained during a grizzly bear attack, including severe cranial trauma, massive chest and thoracic injuries, and extensive soft tissue destruction. Authorities responded by increasing educational outreach programs and enhancing warning signage throughout the backcountry trail system. Tally's family established a wilderness safety foundation in her memory, promoting education about wildlife encounters and proper safety protocols. It was August 22, 2017, and the morning heat was already building along the Rufiji River in Tanzania's Selous Game Reserve. The air hung thick over the muddy riverbanks, where brown water moved sluggishly between dense vegetation. This section was remote, nearly 18 miles from the nearest ranger station, and known for its high concentration of Nile crocodiles. Andrew Peterson checked his camera equipment one final time. At 34 years old, the adventure travel vlogger from Melbourne, Australia, had built a YouTube channel called Extreme Encounters with over 400,000 subscribers. His tagline read, "Getting closer than anyone else dares." Andrew had arrived in Tanzania 3 days earlier, requesting access to the most dangerous crocodile spots. His local guide, Emmanuel Kitwana, had been reluctant, but the money Andrew offered was substantial. After making Andrew sign liability waivers, Emmanuel agreed. That morning, they positioned themselves on a muddy riverbank. Andrew had set up multiple cameras, a handheld GoPro, a tripod-mounted DSLR, and a waterproof camera on an extendable pole. The recovered footage shows Andrew crouched at the river's edge, explaining how Nile crocodiles could grow up to 20 feet long and weigh over a ton. Emmanuel could be heard off camera, asking Andrew to step back. Andrew waved him off. Within minutes, Andrew extended his GoPro on a selfie stick out over the water. His feet were now less than 3 feet from the water's edge, positioned on slippery mud. The riverbank sloped gently downward into shallow water. Nile crocodiles are among Africa's most dangerous predators, perfectly adapted for ambush hunting. They can remain motionless for hours, submerged with only their eyes and nostrils above water. When they attack, they explode from the water with shocking speed. Their bite force exceeds 3,700 pounds per square inch. They kill by drowning their victims, using a violent spinning motion called a death roll. What happened next occurred in seconds. A massive Nile crocodile, later estimated at 14 feet, lunged from the shallow water. The crocodile's jaws clamped onto Andrew's right leg just below the knee. The DSLR recorded everything. Andrew being dragged toward the water, Emmanuel sprinting toward him. The crocodile began pulling him toward deeper water. Emmanuel reached him within seconds and grabbed both arms, pulling with all his strength. The struggle lasted only moments. Blood streamed from Andrew's mangled leg, turning the water dark red. The crocodile was stronger. With a violent twist, it wrenched Andrew from Emmanuel's grip. The crocodile dragged him into deeper water. The DSLR footage shows the horrifying moment. The crocodile beginning its death roll, Andrew's body spinning violently. Emmanuel stood at the water's edge, but entering the water would mean certain death. Emmanuel continued calling out, even as the thrashing in the water became less violent. Emmanuel later told investigators that standing there, knowing there was absolutely nothing he could do without becoming a victim himself, was the hardest part. The thrashing continued for nearly half a minute before the water went still. Andrew had disappeared beneath the surface. Emmanuel immediately radioed for emergency assistance. He remained at the riverbank, watching the murky water for any sign of movement, though the outcome was already certain. A rescue team arrived within the hour. Divers equipped with protective gear entered the water later that afternoon. They recovered Andrew's body downstream, in deep water. Andrew had died from drowning and massive trauma. The crocodile's death roll had caused catastrophic injuries. Medical examiners determined he had likely lost consciousness quickly. Officials issued a statement emphasizing that Andrew had violated multiple safety protocols. No action was taken against the crocodile. Emmanuel Kitwana was cleared of any wrongdoing after the video footage confirmed he had repeatedly warned Andrew. Emmanuel later stated that Andrew had wanted the perfect shot. The crocodile was just being a crocodile. Andrew was being foolish. The footage was used in wildlife safety training programs, but Andrew's YouTube channel and all associated social media accounts were permanently deleted by his family within weeks of his death. His family released a statement asking that the footage never be made public, stating that Andrew's reckless pursuit of viral content had cost him his life, and they did not want his death to inspire similar behavior in other content creators. Tanzanian authorities honored this request, and the footage remains restricted to professional safety training contexts only.
It was July 3, 2017, and the warm waters off Neptune Beach reflected the brilliant afternoon sun as Connor Willis adjusted his snorkeling gear for what he hoped would be an educational encounter with local marine life. The 21-year-old marine biology student from Florida had been studying shark behavior for 2 years, writing papers on shark conservation and frequently discussing the low statistical probability of shark attacks with anyone who would listen. Connor had driven to Neptune Beach with 2 friends for a 4th of July weekend diving trip, choosing the location specifically because of its reputation for diverse marine life and relatively clear water conditions. However, recent storms had stirred up sediment along the coast, creating the murky water conditions that Connor's textbooks had identified as increasing the likelihood of mistaken identity attacks by certain shark species. The area where Connor chose to snorkel was adjacent to a popular fishing pier, where local anglers had been having success with various species throughout the morning. The combination of fishing activity, murky water, and the shallow depth made the location ideal hunting territory for bull sharks, though Connor's focus on finding interesting marine specimens to photograph prevented him from fully considering these environmental factors. Bull sharks are among the most dangerous shark species in the world, known for their aggressive nature and ability to hunt in shallow coastal waters, where humans frequently swim and surf. Adult bulls can reach lengths of 11 feet and weights exceeding 500 pounds, with incredibly powerful jaws containing rows of triangular, serrated teeth designed for crushing and tearing. Connor had been snorkeling for approximately 30 minutes when he spotted what appeared to be a large shark moving slowly through the murky water about 20 feet away. His excitement about potentially observing shark behavior in the wild overrode his usual caution, and he began swimming toward the animal for a closer look. Connor believed his academic knowledge of shark behavior would allow him to safely observe the predator without triggering an aggressive response. As Connor descended toward the shark, he pulled out his waterproof phone case and switched to selfie mode, wanting to document this incredible encounter with what he hoped would be a harmless species. He positioned himself to capture both his face and the shark's silhouette in the murky background, thinking this would be perfect content for his marine biology social media accounts. The selfie would demonstrate his fearless dedication to shark research and conservation. Connor held his phone steady as he floated in the water, adjusting his position to get the best angle of himself with the shark visible behind him in the frame. He failed to recognize the subtle signs that identified it as a bull shark, rather than the less aggressive species he had hoped to encounter. The shark's broad, blunt snout and stocky build were characteristic features of bulls, but Connor's focus on capturing the perfect selfie prevented him from making a proper identification until he was already within the animal's strike range. The bull shark's attack was swift and devastating, as its predatory instincts activated upon detecting Connor's approach. Through the murky water that had concealed its presence so effectively, the massive predator's powerful tail propelled it forward with explosive speed, its jaws opening to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth as it struck Connor low along the torso and hip, its jaws clamping down with bone-crushing force. Serrated teeth tore through muscle and major blood vessels, causing immediate catastrophic blood loss before the shark released him and vanished into the murky water. Connor's friends on the surface heard his muffled scream through their snorkels and immediately swam toward his position, but the damage had already been done. The bull shark released Connor after the initial devastating bite and disappeared into the murky depths as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Connor floating motionless in a growing cloud of blood. Connor's friends managed to reach him and bring him to the surface, but his massive injuries made survival impossible despite their immediate efforts to signal for help. Lifeguards responded within minutes, but Connor was pronounced dead shortly after being brought to shore. The investigation confirmed that Connor had been attacked by a bull shark in conditions that wildlife experts described as ideal for mistaken identity encounters. The murky water, proximity to fishing activity, and Connor's approach toward the shark had combined to create a perfect storm of circumstances that triggered the predator's aggressive response. No attempt was made to locate or destroy the responsible shark. But ocean predators weren't the only captive animals that could prove deadly when safety protocols were ignored. At a private exotic animal facility in Ohio, a dedicated trainee's emotional attachment to a magnificent predator would lead her to make a fatal decision that no amount of education could have prepared her for.
It was February 19, 2013, on the scrubby eastern fringe of the Serengeti in northern Tanzania, where the protected parkland fades into dirt access roads, cattle paths, and wide stretches of lightly patrolled bush. The terrain was dry and uneven, with tall grass broken by thorny shrubs, scattered acacia trees, and open ground that allowed wildlife and people to move through the same space without clear boundaries. Riding in the rear passenger seat was Ruan Keller, 26, a German travel vlogger with a modest following of just under 4,000 subscribers. He worked irregular warehouse logistics contracts at home and used most of his savings for short trips focused on close-range wildlife footage. His channel emphasized proximity, short clips filmed at ground level without narration, zoom, or music. He had no prior documented injuries from travel or outdoor activity. Ruan booked through a low-cost safari operator that permitted brief roadside stops outside the park's core zones. He was not insured for walking safaris, a restriction listed in his booking terms. Operator policy prohibited exiting the vehicle, though enforcement depended on the guide's discretion. Ruan requested stops calmly, citing lighting and framing, and repeated that he would remain near the vehicle. The van was stopped with the engine running and all doors closed. The road cut through dry yellow grass broken by thorn trees and low scrub. The air was still. Insects were audible over the idle of the diesel engine. Cape buffalo are heavy-bodied bovines commonly weighing between 1,200 and 1,800 pounds. They can accelerate rapidly over short distances, reaching speeds exceeding 30 miles per hour, and pivot with little warning. Vision is limited, but hearing and smell are acute. Solitary bulls are disproportionately involved in fatal human encounters, particularly during surprise or close-range approaches. Their horns curve outward and downward into a dense boss that absorbs force and transfers impact through the skull. Handheld camera footage shows a single buffalo standing roughly 120 feet from the road, angled slightly away with its head low. The guide slowed, but did not stop. Ruan leaned forward and asked for a pause. The guide refused, and gestured toward the animal's posture and the lack of cover. Ruan repeated the request. The guide allowed a brief stop without authorizing exit. Dashcam audio records the guide instructing Ruan to remain inside the vehicle. Ruan exited anyway and stepped forward 2 paces with his camera raised. The buffalo lifted its head. Dust shifted beneath its hooves. Its ears rotated forward toward the sound of boots on gravel. The charge followed immediately. There was no false charge, ear spread, or lateral movement. The buffalo accelerated in a straight line with its head low and horns aligned. The right horn caught beneath the lower rib cage, lifting him off the ground. The impact expelled air audibly, captured by the dash cam microphone. His body was thrown backward and struck compacted dirt. His camera slid out of frame. The buffalo continued forward. It placed a forehoof on the upper torso and drove downward using body weight. The sound was dull and concussive. Ruan's legs flexed once, then drew inward. Blood mixed with saliva at the mouth as involuntary exhalation occurred, producing pale pink foam. The animal stomped again, then a third time. Each impact centered on the rib cage. Ribs collapsed inward, puncturing lung tissue. Each strike produced a brief, diminishing convulsion. The buffalo stepped back, snorted once, and lowered its head. No further voluntary movement is visible. From first contact to complete cessation of movement, approximately 25 seconds elapsed. The guide radioed base immediately and remained inside the vehicle. A ranger unit arrived 14 minutes later. No resuscitation was attempted due to extensive thoracic trauma and absence of breathing or pulse. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as massive blunt force trauma to the chest, including multiple bilateral rib fractures, bilateral lung collapse, and internal hemorrhage, with death following shortly thereafter. The dashcam footage was secured by park authorities. Ruan's family requested his channel be removed within weeks. The guide was suspended pending review and later reinstated. The incident was recorded as a non-defensive wildlife strike following unauthorized vehicle exit and appeared only in a regional wildlife safety bulletin, unnamed, a documented example of how rapidly minimum distance violations can become fatal. was February 2nd, 2018, along the Nile River in Uganda's Jinja district. The workday had thinned out, leaving the dock quieter than usual. Stillness, which would be startled into a horrific incident. Levi Ombedo, 41, had built his routine around the dock for nearly 2 decades. He supported 2 children alone after his wife's death years earlier, and most days he kept to a fixed schedule, unloading tilapia crates, mending nets, and finishing tasks that others avoided during the hotter hours. That afternoon, he intended to finish quickly so he could take the children home before dark. He had washed nets in the same spot countless times without trouble. The warnings posted around the dock blended into years of routine. Hippos fed near the shallows, especially at dusk, and fishermen were told to keep their distance from the reed line. Hippos weigh between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds, capable of short bursts of speed exceeding 20 miles per hour on land, and their jaws can exert over 1,800 psi. Although often seen as sluggish, they are among Africa's most aggressive large animals, reacting violently to perceived encroachment near feeding areas. Their bulk allows them to drag or flip a human partially into the water, and their lateral shaking and rolling movements can crush bones and internal organs. Several dockhands had mentioned recent sightings of hippos closer to the shoreline than usual, likely drawn by vegetation pushed in by seasonal changes in river flow. The reeds near Levi's washing spot rippled occasionally, but he interpreted the movement as fish or wind, not the rise of something larger. His children waited a few yards behind him by the motorcycle, watching the river idly, unaware of any danger. As the CCTV later showed, Levi knelt at the edge of the dock, rinsing debris from his nets. The water looked still from the surface, only slight concentric rings spreading near the reeds. The children shifted near the motorcycle but did not appear alarmed. Levi leaned forward, elbows braced on his knees, focusing on untangling a knot. Then the surface, less than 10 feet away, erupted violently. A large hippo surged from the shallows, its head and upper body rising in one abrupt motion. Muddy water sprayed outward as the animal lunged onto the bank. Levi turned at the noise, but the hippo closed the distance instantly, jaws opening wide before clamping down on his right thigh. The teeth sank deeply, anchoring him with crushing force sufficient to lift and drag him partially off the ground. The impact jerked him off balance, pulling him backward across the damp soil. He grabbed the dock edge with both hands, fingers hooking against the wood. His body stretched taut, legs dragged toward the water as the hippo shook its head side to side. The CCTV footage shows his grip slipping under the combined pull of the animal's weight and the tearing motion of the bite. In a sudden wrenching movement, the hippo tore him free and dragged him into the shallows, roughly 3 feet from the dock edge, its body half submerged as it pulled him deeper. Near the waterline, the hippo bit again, this time higher on his abdomen. The animal lifted him several inches out of the water before slamming him down with full force. The impact sent a surge of white spray outward. Levi's legs kicked once, more reflexive than controlled, as the hippo regripped, jaws closing across his upper torso. The hippo submerged with Levi still locked in its jaws, water folding over both bodies. A violent roil of bubbles and froth marked each movement beneath the surface as the animal rolled and shook him in a characteristic territorial defense. For several seconds, the river pulsed outward in tight, rhythmic bursts, then calmed briefly before another surge as the hippo resurfaced slightly. Levi's head and arm appeared momentarily above the waterline, his body twisting under the force of the animal's movements. Before any attempt at movement could follow, the hippo lunged again, jaw closing laterally across his midsection. Its massive bulk rolled partially onto its side as it forced him down, dragging him toward the reed line along the bank. The last visible frame shows his body slipping below the surface, the water darkening as the hippo's back arched above him. A dock worker who had been walking toward the ferry office sprinted inside and called local police at 5:26 p.m. Several fishermen gathered near the edge but stayed back, aware that hippos often remain near their victims for several minutes. The children were quickly moved behind a parked vehicle by a passerby to prevent them from approaching the shoreline. Marine police arrived 18 minutes later and launched a small motorboat to search downstream. They found Levi's body about 40 yards along the riverbank, beyond a patch of overhanging brush. The injuries were consistent with the CCTV footage: massive trauma to the thigh, abdomen, and chest, with clear signs of multiple compressive bites and blunt force crushing from repeated rolling motions. Officers secured the area while co-workers watched from a distance, subdued and silent. In the days that followed, dock managers installed reinforced fencing along the reed line and posted new warning signs advising fishermen to keep clear during evening hours. Levi's children were placed with relatives in the district, and the dock resumed operations quietly. It was November 19, 2016, when Gantry Voiced boarded a charter boat off the coast of Gansbai, South Africa, for what he believed would be a relaxing wildlife observation trip. during his first vacation in over 3 years. The 46-year-old dock supervisor from Port Elizabeth had saved for months to afford this excursion to one of the world's premier great white shark viewing destinations. The waters around Gansby attracted marine predators in significant numbers due to the massive seal colonies that inhabited nearby Dyer Island. The morning conditions were ideal for shark observation, with calm seas and excellent visibility. Gantry joined a small group of tourists and crew members documenting the exceptional shark activity reported throughout the week. The boat was equipped with a fixed camera mounted along the railing and handheld devices. Unlike cage diving operations, this excursion focused on surface observation from designated viewing areas. The crew had positioned the vessel near the edge of a seal colony's feeding grounds, where the convergence of warm and cold ocean currents created an underwater highway for migrating prey species. Throughout the morning, dorsal fins had been spotted circling the area, with crew members identifying at least 3 separate great white sharks of varying sizes. The largest specimen was estimated at over 15 feet in length, a massive female that had been observed making several investigative passes near the boat. Gantry had positioned himself along the starboard rail, leaning over to get clearer photographs of the shark activity below. The boat's captain had briefed all passengers on safety protocols, emphasizing the importance of remaining seated and keeping hands and arms inside the vessel at all times. However, the excitement of witnessing apex predators in their natural environment had created a relaxed atmosphere among the passengers, with several individuals stretching the boundaries of the established safety guidelines. The great white shark represents one of the ocean's most formidable apex predators, a highly evolved species that has existed in its modern form for approximately 16 million years, with shark lineages in general extending back over 400 million years. Adult females can reach lengths of 20 feet and weigh over 5,000 pounds, with rows of serrated teeth designed to shear through tissue with devastating efficiency. Great whites are ambush predators, using exceptional speed and stealth to launch powerful attacks from below. These sharks possess extraordinary sensory capabilities, including the ability to detect electrical fields generated by living creatures. Their torpedo-shaped bodies can propel them through water at speeds exceeding 35 miles per hour, with some specimens breaching completely out of the water during seal attacks. Gantry made his fatal mistake when he lost his balance while leaning over the rail to photograph a passing shark. The boat-mounted camera captured the moment he slipped and fell into the water with a tremendous splash, landing approximately 30 feet from the vessel, in waters where great whites had been observed throughout the morning. The impact created a disturbance that immediately attracted the attention of the largest female shark, which had been patrolling the general area beneath the surface. The attack came with explosive force as the massive great white surged toward the surface commotion. The fixed camera recorded only the initial moments before salt spray obscured the lens, leaving crew members with fragmented footage of the encounter. The shark struck with a single investigative bite, clamping down on Gantry's lower body with tremendous force before releasing and circling. This bite-and-release behavior is typical of great white interactions with unfamiliar prey, as the sharks often test potential food sources before committing to consumption. The shark's serrated teeth caused severe lacerations across Gantry's lower torso and legs, penetrating deep into muscle tissue and damaging critical blood vessels. The initial bite lasted only seconds before the shark released him, but the damage was catastrophic. Major arteries had been severed, and the trauma to his abdomen and pelvis was profound. The water around him began darkening with blood as the crew frantically worked to retrieve him from the ocean. Crew members threw life preservers and used boat hooks to pull Gantry toward the vessel in a chaotic rescue attempt. The shark had not returned for a second strike, having determined that Gantry was not its typical prey. However, the injuries from that single bite were devastating. By the time the crew pulled him aboard, Gantry had lost consciousness from massive blood loss. The deck was covered in blood as crew members desperately attempted to apply tourniquets and pressure bandages to the catastrophic wounds. 2 crew members who participated in the rescue later required counseling for post-traumatic stress. Despite immediate first aid and emergency calls, he succumbed to his injuries before reaching shore. The medical examiner's official report listed the cause of death as exsanguination due to multiple severe lacerations and severed major arteries in the lower torso and extremities sustained from a great white shark bite. The investigation revealed questions about the charter company's enforcement of passenger safety protocols. Despite the presence of adequate safety barriers and equipment, witnesses reported that crew members had issued multiple warnings to passengers about maintaining proper distance from the rails, though enforcement appeared inconsistent. South African maritime authorities implemented stricter regulations for shark observation tours, requiring enhanced monitoring of passenger compliance and mandatory safety briefings with more rigorous enforcement. It was November 12, 2019, and the early morning mist was just beginning to lift over the Sabi River in Kruger National Park. The water moved slowly through this section, creating shallow pools and muddy banks where hippos gathered during the day. The temperature was already climbing, promising another scorching day in the South African bush. Michael Chen and his girlfriend, Lisa Park, were on a guided walking safari, one of the park's premium experiences that allowed tourists to explore on foot with armed rangers. Their guide was Dumisani Mthembu, a ranger with 15 years of experience navigating Kruger's most dangerous areas. The group of 6 tourists had been walking for about an hour when they approached a bend in the river. Dumisani raised his hand, signaling everyone to stop. Through the morning haze, they could see a large hippo resting in the shallows about 50 yards away. Michael pulled out his phone and began recording. The hippo appeared calm, half submerged in the muddy water, seemingly unbothered by their presence. Dumisani explained in a low voice that they would give the hippo a wide berth, circling around through the bush to maintain a safe distance. Hippos were responsible for more human deaths in Africa than any other large animal, he reminded them. Despite their docile appearance, they were extremely territorial and could run at speeds up to 30 miles per hour on land. The group began moving in a wide arc, staying in single file behind Dumisani. Michael continued filming, capturing the hippo as it remained motionless in the water. Then Lisa stumbled. Her foot caught on a root and she fell forward, her backpack hitting the ground with a loud thud. The hippo's head snapped up, its ears rotated forward. For a moment, everything was still. Dumisani instructed the group to remain absolutely still. The hippo was already rising from the water. Its massive body emerged, revealing its true size, over 3,000 pounds of muscle and aggression. Hippos possess enormous jaws that can open to nearly 180 degrees, with canine teeth that can grow up to 20 inches long. Their bite force exceeds 1,800 pounds per square inch, powerful enough to bite a crocodile in half. The hippo began moving toward them, not running yet, but walking with purpose, water streaming off its gray hide. Dumisani positioned himself between the group and the approaching hippo, his rifle ready. The hippo's body language shifted suddenly. Its ears pinned back, and it broke into a full charge, its short legs moving with surprising speed, its mouth opening wide to display massive tusks. The charge was too fast. Dumisani raised his rifle but didn't have time for a clear shot before the hippo was on them. Dumisani fired into the ground directly in front of the charging animal and called out for the group to run for the trees, but the hippo was already committed. The group scattered. Michael's phone footage becomes shaky as he ran, but the audio captures the chaos. The sounds of people running, Dumisani calling out directions, and the thunderous sound of the hippo's charge. Lisa was still recovering from her fall, slower than the others. She ran in the wrong direction, toward open ground instead of the tree line. The hippo, targeting the closest moving figure, pursued her. Michael's camera swung around just in time to capture the moment. The hippo caught Lisa from behind, its massive jaws clamping down on her torso. The bite was catastrophic. The hippo's teeth penetrated deep, crushing ribs and vital organs. The hippo shook its head violently, the way a dog shakes a toy, then threw her aside. She landed several feet away, motionless. Michael called out Lisa's name as he stumbled, another tourist grabbing him before he could run toward her. The other members of the group had reached the tree line and were calling for Michael to keep moving to safety. Dumisani fired multiple shots into the air and at the ground near the hippo. The animal bellowed, turned, and charged back toward the river, crashing through the shallows before disappearing into deeper water. The ranger immediately positioned himself between the tourists and Lisa's body, scanning the area for any sign the hippo might return while simultaneously assessing whether there was any chance of survival. Dumisani ran to Lisa. The hippo's bite had caused massive trauma. She had died almost instantly. Dumisani radioed for emergency evacuation while keeping watch on the river. The hippo remained in the deeper water, visible only as a dark shape beneath the surface. A helicopter arrived within 40 minutes. Lisa's body was airlifted out along with the traumatized group. Officials reviewed Michael's footage. Their investigation determined that Lisa's fall had triggered the hippo's territorial response, and her subsequent movement in the wrong direction made her the most accessible target. The attack was classified as defensive behavior typical of hippos when they perceive a threat near their water source. The hippo was monitored by park rangers, but no action was taken to remove it from the area. Park officials used the incident to reinforce safety protocols for walking safaris, emphasizing the unpredictable nature of hippo encounters and the importance of maintaining maintaining distance from water sources. Michael's footage was submitted as evidence during the investigation, but Kruger National Park officials made the decision to keep it permanently sealed. The footage was deemed too graphic for any public or training purpose, and officials stated that existing educational materials on hippo behavior were sufficient. The decision was also made out of consideration for Lisa's family, who requested that no images or video of her final moments ever be released. South African authorities granted this request, and the footage remains locked in official archives, accessible only to investigators with specific authorization.
It was September 15, 2013, and the late afternoon sun filtered through the trees surrounding the private exotic animal facility in rural Ohio, as Natalie Flores prepared for her final week as a trainee. The 25-year-old animal science graduate had been working at the facility for 3 months, learning the complex procedures required to care for rescued big cats, bears, and other exotic animals that had been surrendered by private owners or confiscated by authorities. Natalie had dreamed of working with exotic animals since childhood, earning her degree in animal science before seeking hands-on experience at one of the few facilities in the state licensed to house such dangerous predators. Her supervisors had been impressed by her dedication and natural ability to read animal behavior, though they had noticed her tendency to form emotional attachments to individual animals that went beyond professional boundaries. The facility housed 15 exotic animals, including a magnificent Siberian tiger named Boris, who had been rescued from a bankrupt roadside zoo 2 years earlier. The aging male had been used in educational programs before his retirement, and his calm demeanor around humans had made him one of Natalie's favorite animals to work with. She often spent extra time observing Boris during her breaks, fascinated by his intelligence and apparent gentleness despite his massive size. Siberian tigers are the largest living cat species, with adult males weighing up to 660 pounds and measuring over 10 feet in length. These apex predators possess incredible strength and lightning-fast reflexes, capable of taking down prey much larger than themselves through ambush tactics and overwhelming force. During her final week at the facility, Natalie had been assigned to evening feeding duties, a responsibility that required strict adherence to safety protocols due to the animals' heightened alertness during mealtimes. The evening shift was typically handled by a single staff member, and the facility's camera system had a known blind spot near Boris's enclosure that was scheduled for repair the following month. As Natalie approached Boris's enclosure for the evening feeding, she noticed that a section of the outer safety barrier had been damaged during recent maintenance work. The repair was scheduled for the following day, but the damage created a gap that allowed closer access to the tiger's primary enclosure than safety protocols permitted. Natalie had been warned about the structural defect and instructed to exercise extra caution in the area. Boris appeared completely relaxed as he waited for his evening meal, lying peacefully in his favorite spot near the feeding station. The massive tiger's calm demeanor and apparent recognition of Natalie's presence gave her confidence that she could safely approach the damaged barrier for a quick photograph. She had been documenting her experiences at the facility throughout her training period, and a photo with Boris would be the perfect way to commemorate her final week. Natalie pulled out her phone and switched to selfie mode, wanting to capture herself with the magnificent Siberian tiger in the background. She positioned herself near the gap in the damaged barrier, holding her phone at arm's length to frame both her smiling face and Boris resting peacefully behind her. Natalie's fatal mistake came when she extended her arm through the damaged outer barrier opening, attempting to steady her phone for a closer shot. The gap was large enough for Boris to reach through with his forelimbs, a structural weakness that should have rendered the enclosure inaccessible to staff until repairs were completed. Boris reacted instantly. His massive paw shot through the opening, claws embedding deep into Natalie's forearm as he yanked with astonishing force. A second paw followed, gripping her shoulder and pinning her against the barrier as she screamed. The tiger's claws severed muscle and ruptured major blood vessels, causing rapid blood loss as Natalie collapsed against the fencing. Unable to pull her fully through the barrier, Boris maintained his grip for several seconds before releasing and retreating, his predatory response triggered and satisfied by the intrusion. Natalie's body was discovered during the next scheduled facility check approximately 45 minutes later, the delay explained by the isolated nature of her evening duties and the camera blind spot that had prevented remote monitoring of the incident. Veterinary examination of Boris revealed no abnormal behavior or health issues. confirming that the attack had been a natural predatory response to human intrusion into his territory. The tiger was not destroyed, as officials determined the incident resulted from human error rather than aggressive animal behavior. The investigation revealed that Natalie had violated multiple safety protocols by approaching the damaged barrier and reaching through the barrier. The facility implemented enhanced security measures and revised training procedures to prevent similar incidents, including electronic monitoring systems and mandatory buddy system protocols for all animal interactions. Thanks for watching. Click the next video for the next stories.